Joe Rogan Podcast. Check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day. All right, we're up.
Sweet.
Hello, Ryan.
Hi.
Nice to meet you, man.
Yeah, good to meet you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
How old are you?
I'm 35.
Wow. Do you feel 35?
I feel like after like late 20s, I just kind of like, well, I have to check in every year to be like, wait, how old am I again? You know?
Yeah.
So not really, I guess.
It's a strange time, 35,
Why?
because you're kind of middle-aged,
Yes.
but you're young.
Well, I was like successful pretty early in my life. So like I was always like the kid, you know, like I dropped out of college at 19. And I worked in Hollywood. And so I was always like the youngest person in the room by far. And so like it's not been part of my identity, but I like felt it, you know?
What did you do in Hollywood?
Well, I dropped out of college. I worked at a desk in a talent agency, and then I started signing new media clients, and then very quickly it didn't work out. But you want to know?
Sure.
So I was working for one of the reasons it didn't work out. It didn't work out because it was a horrible life, and I don't know why anyone would want to have it. But I was working at this desk. I was an assistant, and I was also a research assistant for Robert Greene. 40 Odds Power guy.
Sure.
By the way, I brought you the new one from him.
Oh, great.
He signed it for you.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Robert's a great guy.
He's my favorite human being in the whole world.
All right. Damn, I want to be your favorite.
Let's see. Well, no, so I was working for Robert, and I had the 40 Laws of Power on my desk because I was working on it, and one of the partners became like convinced that I was like up to shit.
What?
Yeah. Like he was like he got it in his head that I was like not a threat, but I was like someone to be suspicious of, and
Because you had the laws of power on your desk?
Yeah. It was the weirdest.
You're too
thing.
ambitious? Like, what was
I guess.
it?
Yeah, it was.
Wow.
And I remember one time the partner I worked for, he like never he was always gone. And he never liked to be on call. So he had me on some call for him, and I was supposed to like be like feeding him info, you know, like when you're on the conference call, I was supposed to like type him stuff. And, you know, like you log into the call and it's like, you're the 7th caller, but there was only supposed to be like 6 people on the call. And so the partner's like, someone else is on the call. Like, who is on the call? And I was like, am I supposed to say something? Because like, I'm not supposed to be on the call. And I kind of froze. It was only like 20. Right. And I froze, and he kept, you know, who's on the call? Who's on the call? And it was like too late to say anything.
Right.
It's funny. I'm like feeling it, like the nervousness.
The nerves,
yeah.
really?
Well, no, because it was so stressful. This is like, you know, this is like an Ari Gold type, right?
Right.
And then all of a sudden I hear like footsteps down the hall, and it's like his assistant, and the assistant is like looking through the door and can see. And I'm like, oh shit! And I hang up the phone, and then you know,
God.
It makes the noise, and then I hear like stomping down the hall, and he like bursts into the thing. He's like, "What the fuck are you doing? I knew you were up to something. Like, I saw you reading that book, you know." And it's like this whole. He's just like screaming at me, and then like he could tell that I was like not scared enough, and so I'll never forget. He grabbed the door and he slammed it, and then opened it again, and then slammed it, and then opened it again, like just pure. Like physical intimidation.
Like a chimp banging sticks?
Yeah, exactly. And so I just got up and left, and then I never went back.
Oh, my God.
It was crazy.
I dated a girl when I was like 27, and she was an assistant for an agent, and she would wake up in the middle of the night terrified that she fucked something up. She would just have these like fearful moments. She worked 16, 17 hours a day for nothing. I mean, she got paid garbage money. And the whole idea was that, like, you're kind of interning / working there, and you were eventually going to get a career as an agent. So she worked for this guy who was just a complete asshole, just a fucking asshole to everybody who worked under him.
It's the dumbest system in the entire world because, like, the person who is good at being an assistant, and I was so bad at it, and would put up with it for like 5 or 6 years, is not the person that anyone would then want to be their age. It's like filtering out for like pencil pushers and like nerds and like you know, it's the craziest system, and that's why most agents are horrible. Is because most people would get up and quit or just not be interested in it at all.
it encourages abuse too, because
Yes.
then you abuse. If you ever get to that position where you're an agent and you get an assistant, you're just going to abuse them because you were abused when you were an assistant. That's just, it's a hazing ritual.
Yes, and people who were hazed are very you'd think you'd be sympathetic to people who were vulnerable, but it actually hardens you because you're like, well, I went through it. You have to go through it.
How weird.
It's awful.
Well, it's a weird abusive system, period, from top down, from producers and directors to Tarantino was on the podcast. He was telling me about this famous producer who kept a bedroom in his office where he would take the starlets and he would bang all the starlets. That would
Power
come in.
corrupts, man.
Yeah. But I think back then it was unchecked. Now it's like those same guys are like terrified now.
Yes.
It's like all those stories are resurfacing. Like that was the way women got roles. Like you had to sleep your way to the top. Like you literally had to do that.
It doesn't seem that hard to not be a piece of shit, though.
But does it in a world where everyone's a piece of shit? Like depending upon what, like there's different cultures of different, businesses. And when you have a business like that where, there's one of the weirdest things about Hollywood is that there's literally people that just decide to pick you. And if they pick you, your life becomes your wildest dreams. You're on the cover of Vogue magazine. You're starring in an action movie right next to the biggest A-list celebrities in the world. You fucking made it. You're at the Oscars accepting the award and thanking that person who points at you in the front row. If they choose you. But if they don't choose you, you're fucked. It is not a meritocracy. It's just not. You could see by like someone like Amber Heard. She's not a good actress, but if you get into the right spot and you do the right thing and you fucking make the right noises, you can become famous and successful.
Well, I think any industry that has gatekeepers is inherently susceptible to being corrupted because those people have a certain unearned power. And they probably deep down know that they don't really do anything and that they're just like guessing, and there's probably something in that too where you're aware of the inherent bankruptcy. Like we don't make anything, we don't do anything.
Yeah.
And it probably goes to your head. And you need distractions and stuff.
Well, I think this is an interesting jump off point to talk about your work and your fascination with Stoicism, because what you're talking about there is like a truth. Like you're talking about, like there's a reality to that job. It's that these people who are the gatekeepers, like there's a lot of people that work in Hollywood that work as executives that are really not talented people. And I've known them forever and I've seen them fail upwards. Like I've known them since I've been there. So it was like 20, 30 years ago and they're still around. And they were retarded then and they're stupid now. It's like they're the same person. It's like there's a reality to that. And one of the things that I think you're really that you highlight very well is the importance of reality, of dealing with things, and of finding positives in any sort of the title of your book, The Obstacles, The Way. It's a great title because obstacles are very important, and although they don't seem like they are, when you're there, they don't seem like they're beneficial. They seem like it's just like the end of the world and this is going to be horrible. But there's some great benefit in difficult times and difficult things.
Well, yeah, even when I was in Hollywood, right? So I have to walk out on this job. I'm like, fuck, this is what I dropped out of college to do. Like, this is not good. My entire life would have been different had that not happened to me.
What did you want to do?
I wanted to be a writer, but I got this really good advice from a writer, and he said writers live interesting lives. So you have to like go do stuff. You have to be around people or you have to go earn having a point of view. You can't just you can't just get good at the craft of doing the thing. Obviously, that's super important, and that's what I learned from Robert as a research assistant. It's like, here's how books come together. Here's the art of doing the thing. But like, if you don't have anything to say,
right?
And so I was like, okay, I had this thing chance to do this. And then I went from there. I was the director of marketing at American Apparel. So I did like weird shit and I was around crazy people. But all of that ultimately informed, what I talk about. But I knew I didn't want to be a person who's just like taking a percentage of what other people do. I wanted to make stuff. Like I wanted to actually produce and create things. So I knew I wanted to be a writer. And when I first read the Stoics, I was just like, shit, this is it. Like when I read Meditations for the first time, I was 19. I was sitting in my college apartment and I was just like, not only have I never read anything like this, I've never even heard of anything like this. Because you have the most powerful man in the world writing notes to himself that he never thinks are going to be published. Like pretty much every other book ever written was like a writer writing to an audience.
Yeah.
And Meditations was never intended to be published. He'd probably be mortified that we even have it. And so it was just a kind of philosophy and a way of thinking that I hadn't heard in any school, in any class from any adult in my life. And I was like, I want to tell people about this.
Marcus Aurelius, one of the more interesting things about the stuff that he writes is how relevant it is today. Like when you read it, you wouldn't imagine that this is being written by a man. Like how many years ago was that?
1900, 2,000 years ago. He's writing in like the mid 150s, 160s AD.
It's very relevant. Like the way he writes, it's the language is incredibly familiar. It's the same, It's one of the things about we would always make fun of the way people talked a long time ago. Wherefore art thou? Like there's a way of talking that we don't communicate like today. But when Marcus Aurelius writes, and if you read Meditations, it seems very current.
Well, it does depend on the translation, right? Because like if you are reading, and people do this, is I'll recommend Marcus Aurelius and they'll just like, get what's free on the internet or whatever. If you're reading a translation from the 1850s or the 1600s, it's going to be in Shakespearean English because,
interesting,
right? Because they're translating it into their
vernacular.
Parlance. Yeah. And so the right translation is key. Do you remember which one you read?
I don't.
I like there's a Gregory Hayes translation for the Modern Library, which I think is the most like lyrical and beautiful of all of them. That's the one that I randomly bought on Amazon and had no idea that it was going to be the one that would hit me.
So were the original ones in Latin?
So this is what's crazy about Marcus. So Marcus lives in Rome. The Romans speak Latin, but the philosophical language at that time was Greek. So Marcus was writing to himself in Greek. So it gives it like when you read those passages or you listen to them and you're just like, that is one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. Like there's this one passage where he talks about like a stalk of grain bending low under its own weight, the way an olive, falls to the ground. He talks about the way that when you put bread in the oven, it breaks open on top, and we don't know why that happens. It's just this like beautiful inadvertent act of nature. He's just like writing like a poet, like a great writer. And again, he's writing in his non-native tongue to himself, never expecting anyone would see it. How fucking talent. It'd be like finding out that's like a comedian is like funny in their diary. You're just like, wow, you're just naturally that. You're not turning it on or off.
Right.
It's just like intuitively part of you.
Yeah.
But I think your point about how it feels timeless, that actually does feel like a thing I've heard comedians say, which is that like the specific is universal. I don't think he was trying to talk to the audience. I think he was so unflinchingly honest with himself that he was touching something universally human. And that's why, because like we should not be able to relate to his experience at all.
Right.
I mean, there is literally a cult of the emperor that worshipped the emperor and their spouse as living deities. And he controlled the largest army in the world. He had unlimited wealth. He could kill or murder or torture or exile anyone he wanted. People cheered him as he walked in the streets. There's no way we should be able to be like, this passage where he's talking about struggling to get out of bed in the morning and you want to huddle under the warm covers. Like, how how? Because I guess people are people no matter where you get in life.
People are people, and not everyone gives in to the temptations of being in that position.
Mm-hmm.
And in his case, I think it made him more apt to reflect upon his thoughts and find the source of why he believed what he believed and why he thought what he thought.
Yeah, he says in Meditations, he says, be careful not to be Caesarified. Don't be dyed purple. Because the emperor wore a purple cloak. And purple, if now we're just like the color purple. To get purple, it was this complicated process of different merchants. Actually, the founder of Stoicism was a merchant in Tyrian purple. But like the slaves would smash up sea slugs or sea snails, dry them on rocks, and this dust would eventually become like the source of purple.
Oh.
So, and he's like, don't be stained purple. So he was like when he becomes emperor, he's like, this will change you if you're not careful. And you have to actively work to make sure that doesn't happen. So he was aware of that.
That was the character in Gladiator, right? Wasn't that Marcus Aurelius? Was it based on him roughly, loosely?
Well, it's I think one of the great movies of all time. But
It's a great movie. But
He-
Peter O'Toole?
yes, he's the one that Joaquin Phoenix's character kills at the
Right.
beginning. And then a lot of the sort of things that Maximus says are sort of very Stoic inspired. The irony of that movie is that Joaquin Phoenix probably underplays how bad Marcus Aurelius' son was in real life.
Really?
He really did get killed by a gladiator. He was a psychopath. Immediately destroys all of Marcus's work. It's one of the tragedies of Marcus that he has a POS son.
I've always wondered, like, how that seemed like it's Joffrey from Game of Thrones. Like, that is a very common thing.
Yeah.
Why is that, like, it's an archetype?
It is. There's another great Eastern emperor, Cyrus the Great, and he has a shitty son too. It doesn't look like Queen Elizabeth's kids are that great.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about Marcus is like, it's weird that he's such this great man, and then most people know nothing about him. But like, Marcus's father was not emperor. So there's what they call the 5 good emperors. So there's basically in all of Roman history, there's like 5 good emperors, and they happen in a row. And they happen in a row because each one does not have a male heir. So they don't have sons. So in the Roman tradition, it was much more common to, if you didn't have a son, you would adopt a son. And so the Emperor Hadrian is old, probably gay, does not have any children, and he adopts. He sees something in Marcus that Marcus is young, but he sort of starts mentoring this boy. They actually go like hunting together. Like he sees something special in this kid. Marcus's nickname was Verismus, or the truthful one. But he's like just a kid. And Hadrian realizes he's too young to name him emperor. So he selects a man named Antoninus Pius, who's the great politician of the time, and makes him emperor on condition that he adopt Marcus Aurelius. So Marcus, and then the thinking was Antoninus Pius would live for like 5 years, and then Marcus would be king. And in fact, he lives for like 19 years. So Marcus has like a 20-year apprenticeship in being the emperor under a man who like could have killed him, who could have been corrupted by power, but is this incredible example. And that's why at the beginning of Meditations, Marcus has like a 2-page thank you letter to Antoninus, his adopted stepfather.
Oh, wow.
It's fucking crazy.
And his son, what was the deal with the wife?
Marcus's wife?
Yes.
So Marcus's wife, Faustina, is, I guess it would be, Faustina is Antoninus's daughter. So they're not related, but they marry the family together. Marcus loves her. They're married a very long time. There are rumors that she's unfaithful, but as far as we know, Marcus pays, no attention to this, does not believe them. But the tragedy of their marriage is Marcus loses like 7 children before they reach adulthood.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine that?
Well, that was very common back then, though, wasn't it?
7's a lot, though.
It is a lot, but isn't that's one of the reasons why the general age that people lived to was so low back then? People think that people died, your age of expected death. It wasn't that. It's just like you died in childbirth. You died, when you were young. You died from infection. It wasn't that people didn't live as long.
Yes. Like, there's lots of old people in Rome.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like getting
to
over.
that hump.
Like, if you made it to 40, maybe you can make it to 80.
Right.
But like, chances are you weren't going to make it to 20.
Yeah, that makes sense. I
But
mean,
so-
they're all sword fighting and shit.
That's also true. I mean, just imagine you could cut your hand and die of an infection.
Yeah, and obviously they're shitting in the streets and this fucking horrible
Even rich people don't
diseases.
have toilets.
Yeah.
Like, they know nothing.
Yeah.
So that's one of the sort of, not rationalizations, but if you're like, how does it go so wrong that this great man leaves the empire to his son?
Yeah.
Well, he does have a male heir. That's a problem, unlike all his predecessors. But it's that every one of the sons that he wanted to succeed him died.
Oh.
And there's some speculation that Marcus's plan. So this is the other crazy thing about Marcus. If I'm nerding out, you can.
No, please go.
So Marcus has a stepbrother. Through this crazy adoption process, he has a stepbrother. And so that he inherits through Hadrian. It's a complicated thing, but he has a stepbrother. And so, like, we know what kings do to their rivals. Like, you have to kill them, right? The first emperor of Rome, Octavian, he's Julius Caesar's nephew. Julius Caesar has a half-son with Cleopatra. Or he has a half-brother or whatever. He has a son with Cleopatra, a son out of wedlock. And Octavian has 2 Stoic teachers who instruct him to murder his rival, which he promptly does, or have murdered. So the precedent was like, you can't have too many Caesars. Like, you can't have more than one
Yeah.
viable heir. And Marcus, when he's Antoninus' favorite, Antoninus preps him, he ascends to the throne. The first thing Marcus does is he names his brother Lucius Verus co-emperor, which is not only never happened, basically before Orson's, it is a nod to how the Republic was. The Republic of Rome, before it becomes a monarchy, is led by 2 consuls, like 2 elected presidents who serve together as a check against power. So Marcus, by naming, he can't put it back to a republic, which is the plot of Gladiator. He can name himself a co-emperor, and the thinking is that's what he was planning to do with his sons, but they all died.
So in the movie, Joaquin Phoenix kind of kills the dad.
He kills the dad because Marcus does not know, in the movie, not in real life, Marcus Aurelius knows his son cannot be king.
But in real life,
He passes it to him.
so, and how did Marcus Aurelius die?
Of the plague.
Oh, wow.
So that's the other crazy thing. But again, timeless. Marcus was writing in what we now call the Antonine Plague, like they named it after him. But it's like a global pandemic. It starts in the East. It overwhelms Rome. 5-10 million people die. They have no way of stopping it. So Marcus leads through all of that. And then the suspicion is that he catches it at the end, realizes he has it, has to send his son away so he doesn't give it to his son, sets in motion like a series of advisors who should lead his son, and then his son promptly like gets rid of all of them and goes bad.
So how does a man like that, who's so introspective and so thoughtful, particularly for the times, how does a man like that have a son that's such a piece of shit?
I don't know. I mean, one argument is he's a psychopath and there's sort of nothing you can do. Like, there's no blame whatsoever. The other argument, the more likely one, is like most great men, and we're talking about history, so it's mostly great men, but again, Queen Elizabeth has crappy kids. Most great men are shitty fathers. Gandhi was a bad father. Winston Churchill was not a good father.
Why is that?
I think they're busy.
Wow.
I mean, do you have a theory?
I think it's a power thing. I think growing up in that with that amount of wealth and that amount of power, that your mind develops in this privileged position where you never have to struggle, you never have to develop character, and you always feel entitled to everything.
Yeah.
You know, if you're like, imagine being a prince. Imagine being the son of an emperor. You have the most ultimate power. You could have people killed. He probably did. He probably killed people. If he got in an argument with a boy, while they were playing, he would probably stab him. You could get away with that. And if you did that many, many, many times, you would develop this ultimate sense that you're superior to all mortals. Like, you would think of yourself as a god king. You would think of yourself as someone who's not a normal human being. And I don't think you could ever get that out of a person. If you grew up, it's like childhood stars are the most broken people that we have on exhibit. If you want to really examine human beings if you wanted to do like a psychological study, like what is the average architect like? What is the average singer like? What is the average child star like? Well,
Yeah.
they're almost all drug addicts. They're almost all completely wrecked. Their personalities never fully develop. They develop under this weird position where everyone loves them from the time they're little. And they get exorbitant amounts of attention that are completely unearned. Then they never have to develop character under adversity. They never have to prove themselves. You cannot prove yourself, in fact.
Sure.
You never have the opportunity. And so what do? They get their faces tattooed. They get hooked on drugs. They're fucked up, man. They're just falling apart. And it's almost universal.
Yes. Well, there's the exceptions, but the exceptions prove the rule.
The exceptions are so rare.
Yeah.
And even the exceptions usually are fucked up.
I heard this quote. It was actually about Marcus Aurelius. No, it was about a different flight. It was in a book about Marcus Aurelius. Anyways, the guy said the worst thing that a son, or that's again male, but the worst thing a kid can say to their parents is like, "I was never a boy," or "I was never a girl." Like, you never had a childhood.
Right.
So I imagine that's part of it too, is like from same with child stars, but also like the person who grows up knowing you're never a normal, regular kid where
Right.
you're getting your ass kicked, where you're
Yeah.
confused,
Yeah.
where you're struggling to both fit in and like earn your place. You're just like, from the moment you're born, you're special. And that's maybe why there's 5 good emperors in a row, is that each one of those emperors did not grow up thinking that.
That makes sense. Yeah, I don't know if it's possible for someone to, I think it's the same as being famous, right? Essentially, he's the son of the emperor. He is famous.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the same thing. I've met dozens of people that were child stars, and I've met some of them that were very nice. Like Demi Lovato's very nice. Miley Cyrus is very nice. I've met a bunch of them. But they're all fucked. They're all fucked in one way or another. They're all like, I'm sober now, or I'm going to do this now, or I'm going to do that. There's never like this sense of calm and discipline and being centered, and there's always like this state of change and improvement. Like they're always like in this weird place where they don't feel fully centered, or they're always like falling over to the left or falling over to the right. The structure's not there.
Yes. Yeah. Do you think about that? Like, how do you? I've tried to make decisions in my life. Like, one of the reasons I live where I live is that like I wanted my kids to be normal. Like I want, you know what I mean? Like to have obviously they can't be that. Like my life is never going to be super normal because I don't have a job that I go to every day, and I don't have to think about certain things that a quote unquote normal person would. But like, there are definitely cities or neighborhoods or lifestyles you could live that are inherently less normal for your kids. And I would like to have normal kids.
Yeah. Normal's an interesting term, right? Because I've met people that grew up in L.A. and their parents are in show business and they're normal.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's possible.
They probably had to create kind of a bubble, right?
I don't know. I think it's all about what kind of activities you get your child involved in. I get my kids involved. My kids are involved with a lot of athletics because I think people have this faulty position on athletics that don't participate in them, and they think of athletics as being something that is for the body. It's not a smart pursuit. It's a dumb pursuit. It's like a physical thing. It's not a mental thing, but they're not right. They're incorrect. There's a giant amount of success in athletics that are about not just mental states, but about discipline, which is also that discipline is a part of the mind, right?
Yes.
We all agree to that. But so is the ability to perform under pressure. So is the ability to deal with a loss and sort of reestablish yourself and come back feeling better. The feeling that you get of the shame of loss is very valuable, and that's a mental thing. And there's mental sort of challenges that you acquire from sports that I don't think are available in any other way. I think you get different mental challenges, and there's different lessons that can be learned from academic pursuits, but there's mental challenges that you only get from athletic pursuits. You only get when you have to force your body to keep going, even though your mind is exhausted, your body is exhausted, and your will is leaving you, and there's parts of you that are telling you to quit. And you have to learn how to manage that. And that is a mental thing. But it's a mental thing in a different way than calculus is. It's a mental thing in a different way than learning languages. But it's equally as difficult.
I think one of the things I think a lot about and that I dislike, like if I was like, describe a philosopher, he'd be like, university professor, turtleneck, like tweed, jacket with pads on it or whatever. Like, you'd think of a weakling. And in the ancient world, like, philosophers were people who did shit, right? Like,
they were warriors.
They were kings, like Marcus Aurelius Hunts. There's an early Stoic who's a distance runner, one who's a boxer. Like, and what I love when you really read the Stoic text is, like, their metaphors are all sport. It's wrestling and fighting and running and hunting because they did those things.
Those things are difficult.
Yes.
And difficult things are good for you. And they're good for your mind. That's what people don't understand that don't pursue them. In America, unfortunately, there's this sort of intellectual elitism. There's this mindset that some very smart people have, because they're very good at certain intellectual pursuits, and they look down upon pursuits that are physical in nature because of this sort of prejudice. They have this idea, and I think it's also like a fear of encountering something that you're not good at, or something that's going to humiliate you, and something that's going to make you feel bad. It's like it maybe came from gym class, maybe came from being forced to participate in sports when they were younger and they didn't enjoy it. So they have this thing in their head that there's no value there.
Yeah. Seneca says, we treat the body rigorously so that it will not be disobedient to the mind.
Ooh.
I like that.
That's good. That's good.
Like when I crank the knob to cold in the shower, or I push myself when I'm running or lifting weights or swimming or whatever, I feel like part of what that is an assertion about who's in charge.
Yes. That's what my friend John Joseph says. John Joseph is the lead singer of the Cro-Mags, but he's also done like a shit ton of Ironmans. He has got this great saying about doing an Ironman. He goes, that's when your mind has to tell your body who the fuck's in charge.
I love that. Yeah.
It's like, and you hear it with his heavy New York accent. It's beautiful. But that's what it is. It's like you have to be able to endure. You have to be able to tell your body that this is what we do. And the more you do it, the easier it is, man. I made a video about it today when I was doing the cold plunge, because it's so much easier than it used to be, but it's still hard. Mm-hmm. But it's just easy because I'm accustomed to the grind of it, because I do it every day. So I just get in there, or almost every day. But it's like there's something to that that's so valuable that doesn't get emphasized enough in our modern day conversations. And it doesn't get emphasized in media. It doesn't get talked about. It's like you have to search for that. You have to search for this idea that struggle is difficult, or like the title of your book, the obstacle is the way. Like getting through things is how you build a stronger foundation. It's how you develop character. It's how the mind understands how to manage difficult situations.
Well, and I think it's a transferable skill. So like
Yes.
you're doing it in the cold plunge or running or fighting or whatever. And then when you're like, when I'm working on a book and books are hard, and they're like halfway through, I'm like, this isn't coming together. This sucks. Should I stop? I'm like, I know this feeling very well. And I know that you don't listen to this feeling. So like, fuck off.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have to build that familiar, because you're going to go through hard things in life, and you want to have cultivated a sense of like not quitting when things are hard.
Yes. I have a very good friend. His name's Cameron Haynes, and he's
a hunter, right?
He's also an ultra marathon runner. Does a lot of, and one of the reasons why he's such a good bow hunter, I believe, is because of all the exercise he does. Because I think I used to think that it was just him building endurance for the mountains. I think there is some of that too. But I think more than that, it's his ability to maintain calmness, because he's always torturing himself. So he's always running like 15 miles in the morning before he goes to work. He's always torturing himself.
Yeah.
So he has this ability to just stay in this like steady state. So when he's at the top of a mountain and there's a giant bugling bull that's like 50 yards away, he can center his pin right on that bull's vitals and release a perfect arrow every time, because he's so good at managing uncomfortable states. He can stay relaxed under fire.
The Stoic word for that is stillness. Ataraxia is the Greek word, but it's sort of like freedom from disturbances. Like even if it's crazy outside, or even if you're going through something internally, like how do you slow things down? Marcus Aurelius talks about, he says, be like the rock or the cliff that the waves crash over and eventually fall still around. I think you've been, when you've been in crazy stuff, or you've exposed yourself, or you've endured things, you just realize that I got to slow this down. I got to center myself, and that being excited is not a positive contributor to this situation.
Right. Yeah. There's a thing that happens when you do a difficult thing, is that you develop more of an ability to do difficult things. And and it's also like it's a daily thing. It's not as simple as like, oh, I used to do difficult things, so now I can do this difficult things. Like, I don't think so. I think you are better off than someone who has never encountered something difficult. But I think there's a reason why fighters take warm-up fights, and fighters, when they're active, when they fight all the time, they fight better. When I was competing, I would be at my best if I had just fought like a week ago. Like if I fought a week ago, I was like, I know this experience. I know this feeling. I've been here before. I was just there.
Yeah.
But if I was like I got injured once and I couldn't compete for like 4 or 5 months, it was weird. Coming back was weird. It was a totally foreign experience. It felt very nerve-wracking. And I think there's something to like forcing the brain, forcing the mind into these difficult positions, into these difficult situations, so that the mind gets accustomed to that feeling, and then you can maintain calm, and then you could keep yourself in the midst of all the chaos. You can keep who you are.
Yeah. Well, I try to design my life around like cultivating / protecting that feeling. So I know people, they're like, they get up, and then the first thing they do in the morning is they're just like sucked into social media or the phone, right? And then like they're already riled up from like before their feet have even touched the floor. They're like, can you believe so-and-so said this? Or like, I heard this. Or like I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was like, actually I was talking to Peter Attia, and he was saying the problem is he scans his email in the morning to check for fires. Like not literal fires, but like stuff going on. And I'm like, so you're starting the day looking for things that are disturbing, for like you're looking for the worst stuff.
But in his defense, he is a physician.
Yeah, of course.
And he's a man who has a bunch of clients, and if a client emails him, hey, my foot's numb and I can't see it on my left eye, there's this he's got to put out that fire.
Yeah.
That's different than you or I.
Yes, definitely. And there are obviously professions where you have to be more on call. But you can, and what we were talking about, and he was like, he's happiest though when he like gives himself 30 minutes to an hour in the morning, which means waking up early, right? That like you're not sucked into that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I try to, that's what my rule is, like I don't use the phone for an hour in the morning.
I broke my phone once on a trip in Hawaii.
Yeah.
I was bow hunting in Lanai, and I dropped my phone. Yeah. And I dropped my phone, and it started just randomly calling people. It was wild. Like I would hold it up and it would call people, and I'd hang up and it would just call somebody else. I showed my wife. I go, look at this. Watch this. And it was just doing this wild thing where it just kept calling. I shut it off, turned it back on. It was doing the same thing. So I'm like, okay, I got to get a new phone. But there's no Apple store in Lanai. There's only 3,000 people on Lanai.
Yeah.
So
Isn't it all owned by one person?
Yeah, Larry Ellison, the Oracle guy. Balling out of control, son. Yeah, he owns a fucking island. So it's a beautiful place too. And so anyway, I had to order a new phone. Well, it took like 3 days to get there. And in those 3 days, I didn't have any phone, and I felt wonderful. It was weird, man. Like I had a weird relaxation come over me, like an alleviation of stress and concern. And it wasn't even that anything was going on in my life where like people were mad at me or I was in trouble or anything like that. It was simply that I wasn't checking in on the opinions of so many people, and I was allowing myself to just think about life. Clearly, also, I'm in paradise, so that helps a lot, and I'm just with my family, so there's no concern about other people. I'm with my family, the most important people, and I'm with two of my very best friends, and we're having a great time together with no phone. But there was a feeling that I had where I was like, wow, I feel lighter. I feel like there's an alleviation. But then as soon as I got that phone, I went right back into it. As soon as I got that phone, I'm going to check on my Instagram. Oh, my God, look at all these messages. I'm checking my email. Oh, God, I got to answer all this. And I fell right back into this bizarre, steady feeling of like a buzz of subtle anxiety everywhere. Just
it can't be good for you.
Terrible for you.
Yeah.
Terrible. But is it like all this other stuff we're talking about, like hard working out, like doing difficult things, like endurance work and sauna work and all that stuff? Is it also a resilience? Does it build up your ability to tolerate massive amounts of information coming your way? Because would you be worse at it if you hadn't experienced it? Because me personally, like I have something like 15 million Instagram followers and 9 million Twitter followers. It's a lot of people. And if I absorb all their opinions, it's unmanageable.
Yeah.
But I'm so accustomed to people talking shit about me. I'm so accustomed to hate that I can read someone being really mean about me and I just go, ha! Like it doesn't get me anymore. But it used to get me. Like when, like maybe like if you go back to like the beginning of social media, if someone would say something mean to me, I'd be like, what is this? Right. This is awful.
Because you thought it was a real person as opposed to like some thing on a screen.
Well, you thought it was a real person, but it's also, you cannot respond. There's no one there. So you feel helpless. It's like you're swinging at ghosts. It's like if no one would say to your face, unless they were a really dangerous person, a lot of the things that people say on Twitter. If someone to say that to your face, they're trying to instigate a literal physical violent encounter. Most people would never do that. But they can say something and just throw it out there and it reaches you and it's like causes emotional pain to people and they know it does, but they feel disconnected from it. And so it takes a long time for someone to understand what that is and how this is a negative thing that you really probably shouldn't have in your life. So don't go looking for it. Don't go reading that stuff because it's just not good for you. But if you aren't accustomed to it, when it does get through and slip into you, it can fucking really bother you. And I know some people that never learn this skill. And I will see something happen to them and then I'll see them 2-3 days later and it looks like they haven't slept.
Yeah. Because
they're just fucked from people being mad at them. And I think that there's a certain amount of resilience you can build from social media. It's just like snake venom.
Yeah.
Take a little bit of it, you develop a tolerance, but if you get too much of it, it's going to fucking kill you.
Yeah, it's like if this is the way of the world and this is how things are, to totally step back from it, pretend it doesn't exist, live in a fantasy world. There's kind of a fragility to that where you have to keep. It's like you haven't been exposed to germs, so your immune system is now like more vulnerable.
Yes.
Like I found, like I used to love New York. I lived there when I wrote Obstacle, actually, and then when I moved to Texas, and then when I moved to the country in Texas. Like now when I go to New York, I hate New York. Like it physically hurts me. It's too loud. Like I can feel the noise. Like my heart is just like,
Yeah.
because the noise pollution is so radically different than my life, right? It's not healthy. Like I think one, it tells me that the day-to-day life of a New Yorker is actually like much worse than they want to admit. They're just built up a tolerance to it.
Yeah.
But like my withdrawal from that makes me vulnerable to it when I'm in it, and I just can't handle it. It's too much.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think you're exactly right. My friends that love New York that I'm close with, they're the most unhealthy people I know. And one of them who I love dearly, he's always saying it's the energy of the city. I love the energy of the city. I'm like, don't you have your own fucking energy?
Yeah.
Like I don't need to hear people yelling at each other and honking horns. We were there at 3:00 in the morning getting falafels, and I heard gunshots. I was like, this is great. This is great. Bang, bang, bang. I'm like, what the fuck are we doing, man? Let's get out of here.
I hear plenty of gunshots where I live. It's like someone decided to play with their AR at like 6 a.m. But
kill a pig.
Yes. The one that I dislike the most is like when like a dump truck or something goes through an intersection in New York and the back kind of lifts up and then it
boom.
Yeah, that I can feel that like in my chest. Oh, I just can't handle it.
Yeah, it's just I don't think human beings are designed to be stacked up on top of each other either. There's this weird, there's a lack of appreciation for other human beings because they're a burden instead of being a benefit, like a community, like a small village. Everybody has a role and everybody's welcome, and you need everybody. In New York City, there's too many people. So the value of people diminishes to the point where people become a liability instead of being an asset.
It turns down your ability to empathize.
Yes.
Because if you did empathize, you would be paralyzed. You'd have to think about how horrible it is to be like a Korean food delivery guy,
right.
or to
a homeless person, or
to commute 3 hours from some borough to make $11 an hour. Like it would be horrible. And so, but the city wouldn't function if you thought about it. And so you have to turn off that part of your brain.
I think that's also a problem with social media. You know, I've discussed this many times that I just don't think we're supposed to absorb the problems of 7-point-whatever billion people. It's too much. And if you just set out every day looking for all the problems in the world, you will have a very distorted idea of what life is.
Yeah.
Because that is not your life. That is all of the lives. And we cannot manage all of the lives. It's just not possible. It's not remotely possible for you to take in all of the violent and sad moments that happen all throughout the day in the whole planet Earth. It's just too much.
Well, you think like we as a normal person probably get more information than like a president got like even just a couple decades ago.
Oh, yeah.
Even Marcus Aurelius is the emperor of an empire of 50 million people. He knew nothing about them. He didn't know what they looked like. Maybe he read someone wrote a letter, and then they would have been essentially non-existent to him.
Yeah.
But we're flooded with more information than than even the most connected humans on the planet just not that long ago. It can't possibly be healthy.
No. It's not. And I think it's changing the way our brain is mapped. I really do. I think this is a very recent thing, right? Social media has only existed for the last 13 or 14 years as we know it. And I think we're going to get to a point where the mind has to adapt to deal with the volume of information that comes in and the way we receive it. And I think along the way, there's going to be some sort of a technological intervention. and it's probably going to be something like Neuralink, and we're going to accept it because it makes the management of all this data more easy.
Yeah, I guess I don't know anything about that.
Neuralink is an idea that Elon has that is initially going to be used for people that have spinal cord injuries, and it's going to change the way your brain communicates with all your muscle tissue. So you're going to be able to move your body even with spinal cord issues. So people that have, it's going to be fantastic for people that have been paralyzed. They'll regain use of their body, because instead of the spinal cord being the conduit for all of the information and all of the signals that you're sending, there's going to be an electronic interface. And this electronic interface I think it'll initially mimic what the mind does with the spinal column, and then ultimately be far superior. And then one of his things that he said that always freaks me out, he said, we're going to be able to talk without words.
Oh, man.
I think there's going to be a transfer of information, hopefully, that surpasses language, meaning that there'll be some way of universally expressing information where you don't have to, you don't have to write it in Greek, you don't have to write it in Latin. It'll come out as intent. Interesting.
Yeah, I wondered, I know having moved here, one of the really beneficial things was that, I know, but I don't see that regularly, people who do what I do. So it turns off kind of a competitive part of my brain where I just get to be me and do what I want to do and focus on what I think is cool and what I want to create. There's not that keeping up with the Joneses part that can be a powerful driver of your career, but also a source of unhappiness.
Did you feel that in New York?
I felt it in New York. I felt it when I lived in LA.
How did you feel it, and what way? Did you compare yourself to other people?
Yeah, just why are they doing better than me? Did you see that person's house? That sort of comparison is the thief of joy, is the expression.
Yes. I didn't know that quote when I lived in LA when I first got there, but I was on this sitcom. We were on a sitcom, right? Incredible.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm on television. This is amazing. And the people that I was with, who are great people, they were all reading the Hollywood Reporter, and they would read this and they'd get upset. Oh, why is she getting this? Oh, why is this happening? Why are they on Thursday night at 8:00? Why? And I go, that's the devil's rag. I go, what are you reading? That's what I would call it, the devil's rag.
That's so good.
And I go, guys, last time I checked, I'm on fucking TV.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm on television. You're on TV. We're on a TV show. And you're complaining that other people are on better TV shows or on TV shows that have better ratings. This is crazy.
Yeah.
You're looking for reasons why your life sucks when you're in one of the best positions that a person could ever be in your line of work. You're literally on a successful television show. This is so crazy. And they're reading Variety to find all the people that are doing better than them. Oh, look at this. Oh, they're in a movie now. I want to be in film. And it was wild to watch.
Yeah, it's one of the things the Stoics say is you would be jealous if you didn't have what you had and someone else did, you would be jealous of that person.
Oh, yeah.
But all you're doing is comparing what you have to what someone else has instead of the gratitude of, holy shit, look how lucky I am.
100%.
And that is sucking your happiness. But I think it's also, if good work comes from being present, it's preventing your ability from actually being great on the television show that you're on, because you're spending energy out in the world on stuff that doesn't matter instead of being I'm going to be the best that I can be in the thing that I am.
100%. 100%. If you are constantly dwelling on other people's opinions, if you are constantly dwelling on other people's success, it will 100% diminish your capability of doing good work.
Yeah.
There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it, because the mind has a certain amount of bandwidth. And the way I always express this when I talk to people about it, I go, look at it like a number. If you had 100 bandwidth, if your bandwidth was 100, and then someone said something mean to you on Twitter, and you read that and responded, and you're going back and forth, now how much do you have? I bet you got about 30 is gone. 30% is just dedicated to this thing. It might be 40. You might have 4. And now what happens? Now whatever work you are actually trying to do is greatly diminished because you don't have the focus.
Well, think of the arrogance, too, of being I'm so good. I can be on this show, or in my I can deliver this book in an environment where so many people would kill like to be able to do what I'm doing. So many people are doing it and we're competing for a finite, amounts, whatever. I can do it with only 60% of my capacity.
Yeah.
It's horrendously arrogant and stupid. Like
I don't think it's arrogant, though, because I think it's ignorant. I don't think people are really aware when they're doing this. I think it's just so instinctive. It's so instinctual. It's such a normal thing to do to, read
sure.
some mean quote that someone said about you, or read an article that someone wrote that pisses you off, or, I know friends. I have friends that I'm not close with, but I'm close enough to them that I pay attention to them, and their career is a disaster. But when I go onto their Twitter page, they're so deeply involved in politics, like massively, where they're quoting spending bills that I don't even know, and they're talking about what the problem with these bills are. I'm like, if you spent a fraction of your life paying attention to your own career and doing what you actually love doing instead of focusing on this, you're focusing on this because you feel like this is something that you can get involved with mentally, where the burden of performance is not on you.
Yeah. Well, there's a Zen story, like this Zen master was told he was criticized by another Zen master. And he said, oh, how lucky for him to have arrived at perfection and to have the time to do such a thing. He's like, me, I'm not there yet. And so when I'm saying it's arrogant, I think
I know what you're saying.
The humble way is like, dude, I can spare zero.
Yeah.
I'm so I'm so on the razor's edge of this. I cannot possibly afford to waste even one energy point on this thing that's not up to me. Which is what the Stoics say. They said, Epictetus says the chief task in life is separating things that are in your control from what's outside your control. And all that stuff is outside of your control.
Yeah.
And you're spending the energy points that could be on what is in your control on the stuff that's outside your control. So it makes you doubly worse.
It does, but unfortunately, this is not taught. I mean, you're teaching it. There's Marcus Aurelius' books. There's many books that are available if you want to go seek it. But this is not something that's being beaten into the head of people on a daily basis, and it should be. It should be something that television shows that, that are supposed to be these intellectual exercises in examining the world around us. One of the most important things is, how are you looking at the world around us?
Yeah.
How are you thinking about things, and through what lens? And have you done the work on your own self? Because if you have not, you're going to look for these struggles in other places because you're uncomfortable dealing with your own personal struggles, and you're avoiding those. So you'll find them in other places. You'll start fires because you haven't dealt with your own bullshit.
Yeah, and this is also what they teach in like 12-step groups, right? It's like the acceptance of a higher power is to say, like, you're not the center of the universe, right?
Yes.
This is why they do the serenity prayer. You're realizing it's like the source of your unhappiness and self-destructive life is your focus on things you don't control, is you're handing over that power to this thing that you're hooked on. And so 12 steps are really like a way to teach someone how to be a person again, like from rock bottom. And you're right, we don't do that. We just assume, well, the problem is even people who study philosophy, they think about interesting but abstract questions, right? Like, how do we know we're not living in a computer simulation?
Right.
Which is fascinating, but like, first we should probably focus on like what is in our control and what is not in our control.
Yes.
Once you've mastered that, think about all the big questions you want.
Right, and how does the mind handle adversity? How does the mind handle difficult situations? And the knowledge that if you force difficult situations into your life that you can control, like rigorous exercise, like meditation, like sauna and cold plunge, and all, there's many different things that you can do, like writing, like sitting down and forcing yourself to do work. It will free your mind in so many ways and allow you to have a philosophy, or at least a philosophical perspective that's based on how you actually think, not based on overcompensating for deficits, not based on trying to, pile dirt on the problems that you've created.
Yeah, it forces you to wrestle with yourself and your shit.
Yeah.
First and foremost.
First and foremost.
Which is I mean, social media is designed to like focus on other people's shit.
Yeah.
What are you thinking about this? What's your opinion about this? And as if the thing cares.
You know, I'm in the middle of another book. I think it's called Amused to Death. And
By Neil Postman?
Yes. And
I was listening to the was it Neil Brennan recommended it.
Yes, he did. And that's Amusing Ourselves to Death.
One of the greatest
Neil
books
Postman.
ever written.
It's great.
Incredible.
And what's fascinating about it, Neil Brennan recommended it, I think, when he was on my podcast, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that's fascinating about it is that it's from the 1980s. And they talk about television the same way we talk about social media today. And he compares television to the way they talked about the printing press.
Yeah. When
the printing press was first made available, a lot of people thought it was a disaster and that really the written word on a piece of paper in a book, like a written book, was the way to go.
Yeah.
And this printing press was some cheap, easy cop-out that was going to make people stupid. Isn't that fascinating?
Well, I love Amusing Ourselves to Death. There's another book called The Image by Daniel Boorstin, which was written in the 60s. And he was talking about this thing called pseudo-events. Like a press conference is a pseudo-event. He was like, it exists for no other reason but to get media attention. That's why they do a weigh-in at a fight, right? Like, so cameras will be there, maybe something will happen, and then it will get more attention, right? Like so he's talking about how much of what we respond to, even then, was not real, but things that were made for the media to suck our attention away. And then you go back even further. There's another book called The Brass Check, which was written in, 1910, 1912, 1930. Anyways, Upton Sinclair, who wrote The Jungle, The Jungle, the expose of the meatpacking industry.
Yeah.
He wrote an expose of the media industry in like the 1910s about how almost all the same things that were happening then are this has always been a problem. It's just different mediums. Like what Postman is saying is that when television is the dominant medium, the world conforms around that medium. And before that, it was radio, and then before that, it was newspapers, and now it's social media and video and these other. And so, like, our world conforms around what the medium wants, right? Like what the medium is good at.
Well, if we make it too easy, then people get soft and lazy. And I think that's what he's talking about when it comes to television. And then he's comparing it to the way Lincoln's debates were.
Oh, yeah, they're like 7 hours.
Yeah.
People went home for lunch.
Yeah, they told people to go home for dinner and come back for 4 more hours. And so they would make these agreements like this man would speak for an hour and a half, and then he would have a rebuttal for a half an hour, and then he'd have his own speech for an hour, and then the other guy would rebut. And it's like they had these attention spans that it was based possibly on that there was no TikTok. There was no distractions, no real, like the kind of media that we have available at the touch of our fingertips just did not exist back then. It was not a thing. So you had to get all of your entertainment from literature. That was the only, if you saw a live performance, that was it, or literature, and that's it. There was no recordings. So you can go before that, before written word, everything was oral.
Yeah.
It was all oral traditions. So you had to learn these oral traditions. They were passed on from generation to generation, and you had to learn them. They were a very important part of your upbringing. So you had to have a grasp of language in a sense that you had to be able to communicate things in an eloquent and sophisticated way because it was part of being a fully formed grown adult.
Well, the thing is, we don't always think of things as technology, because when you think of technology, you think of tech, right? We don't think like a book is a piece of technology. It's a great piece of technology, right? Like it's and the incentives in it are pretty good. Like an author has to work on a book for a number of years, then it's edited multiple times, lots of people look at it, it takes a while to publish, so it has to be somewhat timeless. Then the reader is paying for it, right? You contrast that with like a blog post. The blog post could take an hour to do. It's designed to only be relevant today. It's designed to be shared a lot by other people. So it's focused on the valence of emotion that it provokes from the person when they see it. It's not supposed to challenge them. It's not supposed to be complicated, right? So it's good medium versus bad medium. And the only like recent medium that I think is somewhat positive, it's not totally, but podcasting is a medium that I think generally extends out, right? Like it's not short.
Right.
It's a conversation. Pieces of it don't really spread. It's like a whole thing you consume in a block. It's usually, two people talking or whatever. Like podcasting, I think, is better than most of the other sort of online tech-focused mediums. But I think what Postman's point is you have to think about the incentives or the language that a medium is built around. And then you have to ask yourself, does that make people smarter or dumber? And a lot of these mediums inherently make us dumber, or at least they make it harder to get to truth.
And it's interesting with podcasting how one of the things that happens is that you take social media, which is inherently a short attention span platform, and then people will take out of context clips of podcasts and then insert them into their world of outrage farming.
Yeah.
And they'll, instead of like looking at a conversation in terms of the entire 3+ hour conversation, they'll find a sentence where someone may have misspoken or a disagreement that someone might have had, and they'll force it into their world and then attack it with also short attention span, non sequitur, short little 140, 280 word sentences or letter sentences.
Well, I think Twitter broke a lot of people's brains. So you think about like what a journalist was like 20 years ago. They were someone who thought long form, so like a couple thousand words. They thought like not the day's news cycle usually, but they might be working on an investigation or a piece over a sort of a somewhat long period of time. It would be edited, it would be fact-checked, et cetera. It was supposed to be objective, so you had to consider multiple perspectives. Now you contrast that with Twitter, which is like driven primarily by journalists, right? And they're like, throw all that out and think about the world in 240 characters.
Yeah.
The world is fucking complicated. 240 characters is nothing.
But you could have like Twitter threads where you can have one thing and then you have a second comment on it, a third and fourth, and people do that and they do get coherent points out.
But nothing is the most viral is a singular tweet, right? That's
right.
And you're not like, hey, it's pretty complicated. There's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. You're like, screw this person, or this is evil, or this is the worst thing I've ever seen, right? It inherently, and Postman, I think, talks about this really. It is inherently driven by the demands of that medium.
Yes, yeah, it is in many, many ways, and it's also so alien to the way we are designed to communicate. We're designed to communicate looking at each other eye to eye, and I think that's one of the great benefits of podcasting. Is that podcasting is at its core, it's communication in its purest form. It's like that's how people are designed to communicate. Like what we're doing right now.
Communicating for all of, other than the microphones.
Yes.
What this is one of the most basic human things that there are.
And ironically enough, the microphones enhance it. Because what's going on is you wear headphones, I wear headphones. So I hear your voice in my ear at the same level I hear my own voice. So everything is together. So any overtalk is painful and clunky.
Sure.
Yeah. And that's why, like, if you ever heard a podcast where there's like 5 guys sitting around drinking and there's no headphones, I've done those before. They're fucking disasters. Because if you don't have headphones on, everyone's just talking over everybody. And I have friends who do podcasts that way, and I'm telling them, like, you can't do this. Like, this shit's unlistenable. But one-on-one with headphones is actually better. You don't hear the rest of the world.
That's right.
It enhances
There's a sensory deprivation element to it. Yes. Well, I wrote about this in my first book. I wrote this book about media manipulation in 2012, which I was like, if we don't get this out right now, it's going to be late. And it was like
you were 25.
I was 25.
You're a little baby, and you wrote a book.
I know. People were not pleased with that book. They were very angry about it. Because I was talking about media manipulation, and I was saying the primary manipulators of media are not just bad people like dictators or marketers or whatever. Journalists themselves are inherently manipulative, right? Like, think about it this way. You would never want a reporter to write a story about a company they own stock in, right? Because that would be a conflict of interest potentially.
Right.
Like, or if they were shorting the stock, that would make them write negatively. If they were long the stock, it would
Right.
write positive. But what happens when the journalist is compensated or at least evaluated based on the number of views that that piece gets? That is also a conflict of interest.
Yes.
It's like they're working on commission. And you wouldn't want a shoe salesman to be working on commission because they would pressure you into doing something that maybe you wouldn't actually want. And you couldn't trust their judgment.
Yeah.
And that is and that was a metric of journalism that was invented by Gawker like in 2008, like not a long time ago. Like all journalism forever was not monetized in that fashion until like our lifetime.
Well, the convenience of digital news was so much more efficient than getting an actual newspaper and unfolding it and reading it. And so people stopped buying newspapers. I would like to see, let's see if we can find this. The difference, I don't know how you'd Google this, the difference between the circulation of printed newspapers pre-social media to now. I mean, it has to be a fucking massive hemorrhaging.
Yeah, of course. And not just the subscriber base, but like there were thousands of daily newspapers in the United States. New York City at one point, like in the 20s or 30s, had like 50 daily newspapers for one city.
Wow.
And so all that goes away.
All that goes away, and then you're incentivized with clickbait journalism. So people have deceptive headlines. They have salacious stories that they cover, even though it's not even interesting, not real. It's just bullshit. But that bullshit is going to get people to click on it. Wow. Total estimated circulation of U.S. daily newspapers. There is a fucking giant drop-off right at the invention of social media.
And what if you had somehow charted population growth along that, right? You see how many, that would be crazy.
Look at that number. Like, look where 2007 is. Go to 2007. It's right there. So it was dropping off before. I guess it was probably the internet that made it drop off even before social media. Because, I mean, generally wasn't 2007. Is that the creation of Twitter?
I was in Austin at South by when they launched it, and I was like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. That won't be a thing. And I could not have been more incorrect.
I feel that way about NFTs. I might be wrong. So it seems like the drop off started happening around like 94. Go to 94.
That's the peak here. It was like
91.
Which I don't. That's weird.
Well, one of the big
Yeah, it is
things
weird.
that people don't talk about, Craigslist just guts the newspaper industry because classifieds
right.
subsidized their, Baghdad Bureau and like all that stuff.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I didn't even think about that.
Which is also a tech invention that destroys, a thing.
Yeah. And then there's also people advertised online.
Yeah.
They started advertising for things online, so they didn't need to take ads out in the newspaper, which was always a thing.
Yeah.
Like ads in the newspaper
whole
was a
thing.
big thing. Yeah. And so that was where we got our objective information. If you go back and you read a New York Times story from like 1983, it's a different world. I mean, the way they wrote was different. The way they covered critical issues was very different.
Well, the reason that fundamentally was, and Upton Sinclair was talking about this in the 1910s, whenever that was, he was saying that, when the newsboys are selling the paper, like at the street corner, it's a similar competition, right? So when we think of yellow journalism, it was, extra, read all about it. So you had, let's say there's 50 newspapers in New York City, and you get off a train at Grand Central, and there's newsboys for all of them. They have to have the most salacious headline or breaking story that day to get you to buy it. But then as the 20s, as we got into the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, the newspaper stopped being sold one-off at newsstands for the most part, and most people subscribed, or we'd say, I take the New York Times or I take the Washington Post.
Yeah.
You would subscribe to a newspaper. And so, like, when you look at the breaking of the Pentagon Papers, the headline is beyond boring. It's like a long-ass headline because the New York Times didn't need to sell you the paper. The New York Times knew we are delivering this story to 20 million, 30 million homes today. That's so there's and I think what a podcast does, like when you're not thinking like, I want to have this guest on to grow the show, to get attention. You're thinking, how many subscribers do I have of the show? Am I honoring or disappointing them, right? You're thinking, I know you don't really think about the audience too much, but your point is you have a fan base that you are making stuff for, as opposed to a thing you are trying to sell and shout over everyone else to like dominate the news cycle that day.
That's an interesting point, because that was one of the things that actually came up when I first came over to Spotify. The first week of Spotify shows, they're like, who's the guest going to be? Like, who are you going to have? I'm like, hey.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that. I'm like, that's not what I do. I put on people that I think are interesting. I'm going to continue to do it only that way. And when I'm not doing it that way anymore, it won't be the same show, and I'm going to quit. It's not going to be the same. Like, I have to just have people on that I think are interesting. That's the only criteria I have. I look at all of the requests that come in. I look at all the different people that I'm interested in. Either I reach out to people I'm interested in, like you, like I reached out to you.
I can't believe you do it yourself. That's
I do it myself, yeah. Or, well, I have a guy, too. I have my friend Matt. I have him contact people. But it's all scheduled on my phone. Wow. Everything's on my phone. So I just say, like, I go through the requests, like I get emails, and there's like hundreds of them. So I'm like, no. Where did he go? What? Like Charlie Walker, who was on the other day, like, what? 4 years, he bicycled through fucking Asia and Africa? Holy shit. Get that guy. He just got out of a Russian jail? Holy fuck. He wound up in Russia because he was in the Arctic in Siberia during the time where Russia invaded Ukraine, just coincidentally. And then they thought he was a spy, so they arrested him, and he's in jail in Russia for a month. Like, crazy. I'm like, let me talk to that guy. So it's that kind of a deal. Or, Snoop Dogg wants to come on. Fuck yeah, I want to talk to Snoop. It's that kind of a deal. It's like, it's not like this is going to be huge. Like, I don't think that way at all. And that's the only reason why I think it works. I think if I stopped thinking that way, I don't think it would work. I think if there was a fucking hint of disingenuous behavior, if there was a hint of bullshit, I think people wouldn't trust me anymore. If they thought that I was only doing this to get attention, I mean, I'm sure some people that don't know me think that that's what I'm doing, but that's not. I don't have to. It works. And I did it from the beginning, where I didn't think I was ever going to make any money doing it. So I only did it for fun. Yeah. And then once I started making money, I said, well, I'm doing it this way anyway, and this is how I want to do it, so I'll just keep doing it this way. I never would have thought you could become the #1 podcast in the world by just talking to people you want to talk to. I thought you'd probably have to promote it everywhere. You'd have to like go way out of your way and take ads out and pump a bunch of. I've done none of that. Yeah. I don't even talk about it. I just do it, and through word of mouth, it's become what it is. It's really like the most organic thing I've ever done.
Well, that's what I like. I like Substacks that way, the idea that you're writing for an audience, and ideally that audience is paying you, so you're not like doing this sort of virally thing. I think the only risk can be do you get in a place where, I'm not saying you are, but some people are, where you're like, if I tell these people what they don't want to hear, that costs me money.
I think the big risk today is someone like Substack decides to disempower you and to take away your platform, and that's a real issue.
Yeah.
I mean, I know people that have been banned from PayPal. I know people that they can't use PayPal anymore. I know people that have been kicked off of YouTube. I know a lot of people where things have happened where someone has decided that they're going to censor this person's positions on things.
Yeah, but they call this audience capture though, like where you're because these people are paying you, because that's your audience, you're not necessarily thinking about what's true, you're thinking about what they want to hear.
Right. Yes, I've seen that too. That's dangerous. It's very dangerous for comedians. You see comedians, they find an audience, like maybe they get a certain amount of tension from attacking people. That's a big one. And then they really lean into it, and that becomes their thing. They just go after people because that's where they find success. And you find like they lose who they are. They lose who they are, and they become captive.
Yeah, like a caricature of yourself.
Yes, yeah. You also see that with people that switch political affiliations. Like lured in to the other side, and they get a lot of attention from this transition. And so they make this transition and everybody loves them. And so then they go all in. It's generally speaking, I see it from people that used to be left wing and become right wing. Yeah. And they go all in, and it becomes an identity.
Yeah. You want to, you want to be a free agent is what you want to be. Like this is what I think about this. This is what I think about this. And I don't really think about what other people think. Like sometimes I'll write something that's political and people will get upset. And I go like, I didn't build an audience to not say what I think. Like I want to own the audience, not the audience own me.
Yeah, I mean, you don't even own the audience. You own yourself, right? Yeah. And you're going to have an audience because your ideas are interesting. But if you decide that you're only going to speak from a right-wing perspective, there's a lot of people that do that. There's a lot of people that do that already, and they do that because there's a business in that. It's very valuable. Like you can talk from a pure left-wing progressive perspective and attack everyone as being far right or Nazis, and you can get a lot of money that way. It's a good business model. Yeah. But it's not smart. It's not good for you either. It's not good for you intellectually because you're not going to be examining things from a purely objective perspective. You're not going to look at your own flaws in your own thinking and the way you formulate ideas and go, why do I think like that? You're not going to do that if you're captured by, the progressives or captured by the Republicans. The people that get locked into that, it's like, man, and when they transition, like if someone transitions, it's very similar. The word transition has been captured, right, by transgender today. Yeah. But it's kind of similar because if you go male to female, you're most likely not going back.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. And so if you go left wing to right wing, you're not going to come back to the progressives. You're not going to go, you know what, I just decided the right wings are racist and they're evil and they support white supremacy and fucking the military industrial complex. I'm going back to the left. Like, no one's going to take you. They're not going to take you back.
And isn't that kind of what happens? It's always like one issue. They talk about one issue, and then that issue gets so much attention, and then it's like magic, they suddenly also have the same right-wing opinion on all the other issues. And you're like, yeah, because you're not going to be the one guy who has one out-of-step opinion and then stay in this group. You stepped out in the middle into no man's land, and now these people don't want you anymore. So you're like, I might as well go over here.
Well, but it's only if you choose to align yourself with a very specific ideology. Yeah. If you don't do that, you can have opinions like, I mean, I have a lot of opinions that are on both sides, and I think most people do. I think most people have conservative as well as, like, I'm very socially liberal, like about as socially liberal as you get. But more and more as I get older, I start looking at things from a perspective of being a pragmatist. And I start looking at things instead of looking at what do I hope people will do if you give them free money and if you give them free education, if you give them free this and free that and take care of them, I start going, well, what does that do to the psyche? Yeah. And does that force laziness? Like, if everyone in this country, let's imagine a world where everyone in this country gets $50,000 a year. Yeah. Everyone. How much less productive would we be? It would probably be horrific. Now, I want to live in a world where...
This is universal basic income.
Yeah. I mean, I want to live in a world where no one has to worry about how to feed themselves. No one has to worry about how to put a roof over their head. All you have to worry about is what do you want to do? What would best serve your interests, and also how could you provide a service or whether it's art or something that other people are going to enjoy and appreciate, and that could elevate you past the middle class, past making $50,000 a year into becoming, affluent. Wouldn't that be nice if you didn't have to struggle and spend your resources thinking about how am I going to feed myself, and instead let me write the best book I can write. Instead, let me create the best film. Let me make.
Can you get paid on top of the $50,000?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the idea, but I don't think it would work. I think we would lose a lot of great people because I think there's a lot of people that are motivated by desperation. They're motivated by this kick in the ass where you have, like, I have friends that had children, and once they had children, they became fucking hyper ambitious because they realized, oh my God, I have to pay for this little baby. And then they realize, like,
It does turn you into an adult.
yes,
Because you're like, I'm responsible for these people.
yes, it's a completely different kind of feeling. But I wonder, but I don't want people to live in poverty. Yeah. Poverty sucks. It's a terrible place to be desperate, and that causes a lot of crime. It causes a lot of violence. There's a lot that's attached to poverty that's horrific. However, it is an incredible motivator to get people to get moving and to do something. And desperation, much like loss and humiliation, are great motivators to make you work harder, to be better at whatever thing you were attempting to do that failed. There's something about being poor that forces people into this feeling, this hunger that causes greatness in so many human beings, so many artists, so many great musicians, so many great comedians, and so many great people that have accomplished amazing things came out of nothing. And there's this inherent hunger and this desire to be someone, to be something that creates greatness that gets recognized by so many people and enriches so many people's lives. If you think about how many hip-hop artists who are so poor became so rich and inspired so many people with their music. How many comedians did the same? How many people who wrote books have come out of utter poverty, and through the struggle and pain of their existence, it gave life to their words in a way that you're just not going to get sleeping on silk sheets.
Yeah, but are you sleeping on silk sheets making $50,000 a year?
No.
Probably not. So there's
No, you're
probably
not.
a number,
But
right?
yeah,
There's like a subsistence number.
But you don't. But then again, it's like, how much encourages people to just exist? Like that subsistence number. How many people would just get that kickstart from poverty and leads them into success? And this is not encouraging poverty. I don't think poverty is good. I was poor when I was a kid. I hated it. It's a horrible feeling. But that feeling, it is a motivator that is unlike anything else. That the pain and the discomfort of poverty and of feeling like a failure or feeling like a nothing is an insane vehicle for your human potential. Like it can push you if you get on it and ride it, but it can also destroy your life. I mean, it causes so many people to become drug addicts and so many people to become criminals because they're desperate and they're poor and they feel like the world has abandoned them.
You know that quote, like, if you aren't liberal when you're young, you have no heart. And then if you're not a conservative when you're older, you have no brain.
Yeah.
There's probably a truth to that, but I also really hate that expression because it sort of means like you're supposed to care less about people or think less with your heart as you get older, which strikes me as kind of one of the problems in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I don't think it's real. I think people give in to that because it's so nuanced and complex. The reality of human life and civilization is so nuanced and so complex. You know, I was watching this horrible video the other day. It was really bad. It was these two guys in Brooklyn. They robbed this kid. They walked up to him and sucker punched him, and he fell back and hit his head off the street, and he died 5 days later. And they stole $20 from him. I mean, that's all he had on him.
Yeah.
They punched this guy in the head and took $20 out of his pocket. And now he's dead. And I was thinking so many different things. First of all, I was thinking, like, imagine being that kid's parents and finding out that that's how your child died. Yeah. And then I was thinking, imagine being those kids that did that to that guy. And your life has gone so far off the rails that you're essentially a parasite on society.
Yeah, you can't find a better way to make $20.
You don't. Your development is so fucked. Yeah. Like your morals, your ethics. Someone's failed you. Society's failed you.
Sure.
And that's what I really feel like. I feel like one of the things that conservative thinking leaves out is that not everybody starts at the same position. You don't start at the same starting line. It's different. And if you don't accept that, if you don't look at that, then just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. They don't have boots, man.
Yeah.
Okay. There's people out there that don't have anything, and I don't even think most of these people saying that. Like, you just got to put your nose to the grindstone and get to work. You don't even understand where these people are starting from. And if you're these kids living in Brooklyn, walk around sucker punching people in the street and stealing money from them, like, your morality is so fucked. It would take so many mushrooms and so many psychedelic trips and so much therapy and so just to try to realign you with good and love.
Yeah.
So this is like the liberal part of me. The liberal part of me feels terrible for the guy who got killed, but also feels terrible for these boys that sucker punch this guy, because in my mind, I think, like, if I lived their life, I would be them. If I was in that situation of dire poverty and probably a lot of emotional and physical abuse, but if you're accustomed to just walking up to someone and punching them, you've probably been punched. You've probably been abused. You've probably seen it all. And you probably have, like, deep anger towards society and civilization. And you've probably been conditioned to think that you deserve this and that you got to go get what's yours. It's a horrible failure on all of our parts. So even though, like, I might have some conservative ideas, most of my ideas are very liberal. And in that regard, like, my feeling is we need to pump insane amounts of money and time and effort into inner cities. We need to fix the imbalance. There's obviously an income inequality problem in this country, right?
Sure.
But there's also an effort inequality problem in this country. Both things are true. And poverty, like extreme poverty, has a gravity that is so difficult to escape. You're like a 500-pound man who's trying to do box jumps. Like, it is so goddamn hard. And we got to teach that 500-pound man how to lose some weight. And that's how I look at the general state of the horrific poverty that exists in these inner cities. Its gravity is inescapable. So many people have been trapped in it for so long. And there's been decades upon decades of these places. There's multiple ones in this country that have been completely ignored by this country that supposedly wants everything to work out better. Well, if you want something to work out better, you got to look at the people that are in the very worst starting position that's available in the United States of America and change that. Elevate that.
Have you, did you watch the movie Nomadland?
No.
Or there's a really good book, and I read it not that long ago, and it's basically about people who, like, because of the financial crisis and other stuff, it's like old people who, they lost their houses, and so now they live in vans or campers, and they just drive around the country working at different, like, theme parks or Amazon seasonal warehouses. Like, these companies recruit those people because they're like, old people work hard. They don't have anywhere to go. They pay them, like, next to nothing. They get, like, a couple $100 a month in Social Security. These are people, like, living right on the edge. They live in a van. And as I was reading it, there was this voice inside me that was trying to think, like, how bad do you have to screw up? Like, what choices do you make in your life where you end up this way? Like, my first thought was, like, basically, like, how is it this person's fault, right?
Right.
And I realized that I was doing that because if it was their fault, then it wouldn't have to make me sad, and I wouldn't have to do anything or change any of my habits or viewpoints. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you're
Yeah.
like, no, the system failed these people. Like, these people have worked their whole lives. Maybe they messed up once. They got addicted to alcohol, or they went through a divorce, or, you know, they got fired from one. And the system failed them in some way, because you shouldn't. If you work your whole life, you shouldn't end up in a van down by the river, right? Like, these aren't like people addicted to crack on the side of the street. These are people who, if you saw on the street, you wouldn't know that they live in a camper, right? And I think the idea that the system has failed huge amounts of people, and that you can't individually hold someone responsible for something that is a collective failing. They're a symptom of a huge problem.
And many of these people have not had access to anybody who thinks outside of the box. The access that they have to other people are the people that live in their small community, that are also troubled by the same problems that they are.
Yeah.
And, in many of these places in the country today, it's pills. I mean, there's a great documentary that was put out by Mariana Van Zeller. We had her on talking about this. I want to say it was like 8 or 9 years ago. And it was called the OxyContin Express. Did you ever watch that?
No.
But it's all about the horrible situation that used to be in Florida where they had these pain management centers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you go to the pain management center. It's really just a pill pill mill rather. And so you would go into this place. They would have a doctor on one side. They would say, "What's wrong, Ryan? Oh, my back hurts. Oh, well, you need OxyContin."
Yeah.
And then you'd
Here's
go
some
right
heroin.
next door, and they would give you the pills.
Yeah.
And there was no database. So you could go to Jamie, and Jamie could prescribe you the pills, and then you can come to my office, and I would prescribe you the pills. And people would do that, and they would go to 10, 15 different doctors. And they had it set up that way specifically to make the maximum amount of profit.
Yeah.
So they knew that they were doing this, and then these people would take these pills. They'd have a trunk full of them, and they'd drive them up through Kentucky, and that's the OxyContin Express.
Yeah, and then we're like, that person lives in a camper park because they were a drug addict, as if they weren't exploited and basically like their humanity extracted out of them by
Yes.
these doctors and these multi-billion-dollar conglomerates, that they're doing fine.
Well, the people that are running it just said it's a side effect. These fucking people, if they weren't hooked on drugs, they'd be hooked on something else. If it wasn't that, it'd be gambling. If it wasn't that, it would be cocaine. If it wasn't that, it would be, whatever, cigarettes. They're gonna find a way to ruin their lives because they're idiots. And these people can justify things like that, and you don't realize, like, some of these people are 4. Okay, and if you're 4 and you're living in that trailer and your mom's on OxyContin, like, you're fucked.
Yeah.
But if that same 4-year-old grew up with like a really healthy person who lives in an upper middle class suburb and spends time going over the homework with the kids and takes them to practice and gets them involved in sports and, maybe exposes them to some activity that will eventually be their career, that person could be a functioning, thriving member of society and be a benefit to everybody. It's really in where you fucking start from. And this is why the whole, if you are young and you're not a liberal, then you have no soul. But if you're old and you're not a conservative, you have no mind, doesn't work with me.
Yeah.
Because I'm forced to look at the reality of the situation. I didn't have the best childhood, but I had food. I had parents who cared about me. I had stuff. I didn't have a bad childhood. I went to high school in a pretty nice area. It was not bad. Like, it was enough bad to make me motivated, but it ain't shit compared to what someone who lives in Appalachia, who lives in a fucking trailer park, whose whole family's a bunch of drug addicts and criminals. There's people in this world that are fucked. Their starting block is miles from yours, and it's all uphill to get to you.
I think about that even with the student loan thing, which I'm a dropout, so I don't have any student debt. So I don't have super strong opinions on whether it should be forgiven or not. But you think about how exploitative and extractive that system is, where colleges were like, oh, you're 18, you can't even legally drink, but sign this contract to pay $70,000 a year for your, insert obscure degree that has no viable job prospects. Oh, you can't afford that? Just take out a loan. Don't even look at it. By the way, this is the only unforgivable debt in the entire world.
Yes.
And, when you graduate, you'll be $400,000 in the hole and you'll figure it out. And so when I look at my friends and they're like, they're my age and they're just starting to get it together, the reason they didn't buy a house like I did when I was in my mid-20s is because they have a house that they're carrying around on a bank balance.
Yeah.
And it's getting bigger every year.
Every year.
And then we wonder why they don't become it totally changes the jobs they take. Like, why do they go get a job in Wall Street or whatever? It's because they have to pay back this obscene debt. Meanwhile, the college is just hiring more and more bureaucrats and administrators and putting in a fucking lazy river and, all this nonsense. And this is coming off the backs of a generation of people who were misled or outright conned into a thing that, is totally unjustifiable.
Totally unjustifiable. And the way you know it is in the fact that what you said, it is the only debt that's not forgivable.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what happens. I read a story about the prevalence of people who are getting their Social Security checks docked because they
Insane.
owe student loans.
Can you imagine carrying that your whole life, and you have a piece of paper to show for it?
And you're at the end of your life, and this is your subsistence income. Your subsistence income is reduced because of a debt that you can never get rid of that didn't serve you, obviously,
Yeah.
because you don't have any money.
If someone sells you a house that, you paid too much for, or it's filled with termites or whatever, you get a bad deal on a house, you can just walk away. You'll take a bath on it, but you can just walk away.
Yeah.
If you got conned into some for-profit school or some, they overpromised that, hey, this is what you'll make if you become a physical therapist, you get your master's in this or whatever, you have no recourse.
No.
And those people in their middle-class houses or bigger, the people that profited from that money, like I think, so people sometimes say this about me. They're like, oh, you're profiting from philosophy because I sell my books and, stuff that I'm profiting from it. And I go, you think this college professor who has job security for life, paid for by the U.S. government, subsidized by the U.S. government, meanwhile is charging students $50,000, $60,000 a year for the courses for this piece of paper? Like he or she isn't also profiting from it? I can sleep at night. I know I charged $17 for a book that took me 2 years to write. You made someone take out unforgivable debt to attend your university class at obscene amounts of, you know what I mean?
That's true,
it's
but
gross.
there's no need to have a what about with that. What about that guy? What about this guy? Just, you're not getting paid for philosophy. You're getting paid for your work. You're getting paid for work. And if you put together a good book, that is your effort.
Sure.
And you will profit from that because people enjoy it. It is a meritocracy. Selling books is a meritocracy because if people don't enjoy your books, you don't get money.
Yeah.
It's really very simple. So anybody who says, oh, you're getting paid from philosophy. No. Getting paid for work in philosophy. That's like getting paid for serving food. Are you getting paid for serving? You're getting paid for work.
Sure.
It's work.
Yeah, no, I don't feel bad about it.
It's just value.
I'm just saying we don't think of the college professors or the university president. We think of them as good people, and I'm sure they mean well.
Some of them
But
do.
the system is inherently exploitative and extractive against people at their absolute, not their most vulnerable, but vulnerable people who don't understand that they're signing away their financial freedom or the choices they can make as far as their careers goes for their entire life because you'll never be able to get out of this.
Yeah, and the thing is, too, that information is available. It's like that scene in Good Will Hunting where he talks about going to the library.
Yeah.
Like you could learn all this from the library. You don't have to spend all this money on education. That didn't really used to be true, but it's true now. You can get a full-blown 100% education without ever stepping into a classroom. You can have a varied, nuanced education about a myriad of subjects. And you can get that all from books. You can get it from online. There's online courses you can take for free. I mean, you can become incredibly well-educated. Now, would you be able to do an internship with some scientist that's working on genetic engineering? No, you probably would have to have some sort of a degree to qualify you for something like that. But for just general education in terms of elevating your intelligence or elevating the information that you possess, that's readily available.
When you think about probably what Harvard cost when that movie came out versus what it is now, I bet it's like doubled or tripled. Like, I remember when my son was born, someone told us that there's a thing in Texas where if you want to send them to UT, you can prepay for their education now. Ooh. So like you can be like, but the bet there is that, let's say it's 200 grand, that 200 grand compounded in the stock market for 18 years will be less. Will be less than just the natural increase in tuition over 18 years. Oof. Which is obscene. They are implying that they plan to beat the stock market compounded every year with their tuition increases for a state run institution.
Well, I think it depends on who's playing the stock market, because if it's Nancy Pelosi, I'll give her the 200 grand, and I'm betting on Nancy because I think she knows shit. Harvard College tuition, fees, room, and board. 2017 tuition was $43,000. Service fees $1,000 plus. Student service fees $2,000 plus. Room $9,000. Board $6,000. So the total is $63,000.
But that's 2017. So
Yeah.
5 years later.
It's probably quite a bit higher.
Oh, man.
Yeah. It's pretty wild. But if you go back to Goodwill Hunting, which was, what was that? Like 96? Yeah. So it was only 27,000. So it was half.
No,
Less than half.
You talk to people and they're like, "Oh yeah,
That's wild.
I went to Berkeley and it was $46 a semester," or whatever. And then they judge people who are my age and they're like, "These kids," it's like, are you fucking kidding me?
But then there's a thought: if education was free, you would take it for granted,
Sure.
and you wouldn't work hard at it. It's like the same perspective about hard work and poverty. Like if you're poor, it motivates you to work hard. I mean, there's a lot of examples of that. It's like fighters. Almost all the best fighters come from poverty. Almost all of them. It's very rare that a rich kid becomes a super successful fighter.
Isn't that like the history of boxing? Is like whatever the most marginalized
Yes.
group was in that generation, that's who the boxers were?
Yep, used to be Jews. Used to be like Slapsy, Maxie, Rosenblum. It was like a lot of Jewish boxers. And then it was Italians. It was Italians for a long time. It was African Americans. It's still African Americans predominantly, but it's a lot of Russian immigrants.
Irish for a while,
Yeah, a lot
right?
of Irish. A lot of Irish. It's like whoever the poor immigrants are that are scratching, clawing. Yeah, those are the people that have the most hunger and the most anger. And unfortunately, they've probably experienced the most physical abuse, which
Sure.
is a significant factor in your ability to dish out punishment.
Yeah, because like if they're your kids and you could choose, you want them to play like lacrosse or something where they're
Yeah.
not where they have the most upside but the least downside.
Yeah, I would way more like my kids to fight than to play football. Football
Yeah.
to me is the scariest one because I don't follow football, but I watch it occasionally. And when I watch those giant super athletes just running full clip and slamming into each other, that is just car accident after car accident. And then you got to take into account all the ones that happen in high school, all the ones that happen in college. And then by the time they get to the NFL, they probably are already like severely mentally compromised. They
Yeah.
probably there's a number. See if you can find this. They did a study on chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
That's the
Yeah,
thing you get.
CTE, and they measured from children playing Pop Warner football all the way up into the NFL, and they found an astounding number of people at every step of the way exhibited symptoms of CTE. It's a sport where I know fighters that don't have like visible CTE, and they're really good fighters. The Journal of American Medical Association found CTE in 99% of brains obtained from the National Football League players, as well as 91% of college football players and 21% of high school football players. That is fucking crazy. The data suggests that there is very likely a relationship between exposure to football and the risk of developing disease. 99%? What the fuck, man? And it's a degenerative brain disease. And it comes from repeated head trauma. It's a terrifying disease. And look, in many ways, I'm kind of morally compromised because I am a commentator for professional mixed martial arts. It's a big part of what I do. I'm a giant fan of the sport. I've been a martial artist my whole life. I used to compete. It's a big part of who I am. And I know it's bad for you. And it's not just bad for you. It's bad for you in one of the worst ways possible, and then it compromises your ability to think.
Yeah.
Which one of the reasons why I stopped, and I stopped when I was young, when I was like in my early 20s, because I knew that I was compromising my ability to think. I knew that what was coming. I saw it in other people, and I'm like, I got to get out of this. And when I see it now in friends, and I see it in people that I care about, and I've seen all that they've gone through, and I know what's ahead of them, I get terrified for them. And I try to sound the alarms. And when anybody's thinking like, man, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to do this, get out now.
Yeah.
Like, get out now. Pretend you can't do it. Think of your next fight as a death sentence. Get out. Just get out. If you're thinking you don't want to do this anymore, don't do it. Because somewhere out there, there's a guy who's not thinking about that at all. And he's just trying to be a destroyer. That's Mike Tyson when he was 21. And he wants to separate you from your consciousness. And you got to get away from that guy. Don't do that anymore. Stop doing it, because you don't get those brain cells back. You don't get them back. CTE doesn't reverse itself. I mean, there might be some therapies that come along in the future, but right now, from what I'm aware of, I don't know of anything that makes me comfortable saying, like, you're going to be fine. It's going to heal up. You're going to be fine.
So how do you separate those feelings from your enjoyment of the thing? Because I love football, and it's been cool. My books have sort of made their way through the NFL. I love it. I love watching it. I love talking to the players. But yeah, how do you square that?
I look at it the same way I look at life, period. Life is finite. You have a finite lifespan. You're not going to live forever. You only have so much time. If you choose to spend a good portion of your life living the wildest, most dangerous, and extreme way outside of war and law enforcement and firefighting and, you know, being an EMT or something like that, like being a professional fighter is one of the craziest fucking things you could do with your brain and your body.
Yeah.
You're literally playing a game of, I'm trying to steal your health. Like,
Right.
you're trying to steal health.
Yeah.
You kick someone in the liver, you're stealing their health. You're shutting their body down. And you can only do that so many times to a person before their body deteriorates. And it's a choice. As long as you're aware of what that choice is and the exhilaration of victory is worth it to you, and you can go through the pain and the horrible feelings of loss and the punishment of training, if you're willing to do that, and that is exciting to you, because ultimately you know that the end product is so entertaining. If you watch an incredible fight, it is so entertaining that the joy that you bring to people, when those guys, like if Michael Chandler is sitting on top of the octagon cage with his arms up in the air and the whole arena is like, yeah, and then millions of people around the world are watching that and they're feeling the same, like, wow, you're providing a drug. You're literally providing an endorphin rush to millions of people. And you're doing so at the cost of your own health. You're doing so where you're compromising your lifestyle to dedicate yourself to the Spartan existence, where all you're doing is training and eating clean and resting right and going through all of the recovery modalities. You could choose to do that. And I am all about people choosing. I'm all about people. Like, if you want to fucking flip dirt bikes over the Grand Canyon, I'm not going to stop you. I don't want my kids to do it. I wouldn't want anybody I love to do it.
But the structural argument, or your point about like universal basic income is like, did they actually have a choice? Like it was between that and what?
For a fighter?
Yeah.
Well, it depends. You know, like I use the example of Michael Chandler. I don't really know about Michael's background in terms of like how he grew up, but I knew he was a very high-level wrestler in college, and generally that means he's got an education, and he's a competitor, so he chose to fight.
Sure.
A lot of people just come from, like, Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor, who's a great fighter, came from poverty. You know, there's other guys that have come from, you know, various levels of struggle, but ultimately were compelled by the challenge of this insanely difficult pursuit and the glory of victory. And so in that sense, yeah, they have a choice. Like, a lot of these guys went to college.
No, there's definitely ones that have a choice. But I'm just saying, when you look at some of these athletes or fighters or whatever, where they were like the alternative was like jail, drugs.
Yeah.
Like nobody. So they chose it, but they didn't have a lot of choices to choose from. And so is there something inherently exploitative then in like being like, well, it's horrible, but they chose it, but they didn't really choose it because nobody actually gave them any like life did not give them options.
I don't buy that. I don't buy that for most mixed martial arts fighters, and that's most. I do buy that for some boxers. There's some boxers that didn't go to college and grew up in abject poverty, and that was the only way out. Boxing
Some of them are
is
like
more
scouted
available
at an early age and groomed into it, right? Like Mike
sure.
Tyson,
Right.
doesn't seek out. Even Muhammad Ali is like,
Yeah.
someone's like, you're going to be a boxer.
There's something to that, sure. But at a certain point in time, Mike Tyson could have retired.
Yeah.
The amount of money that he generated by the time he was 20 years old, he could have probably lived off if he lived well for the rest of his life, if he decided to. It's just the glory of it and the excitement of it and the thrill of victory. It's the old sports thing, ABC Warbler Sports. The thrill of victory, the agony of defeat. Remember that?
Yeah.
That's what it is. You certainly can make an argument that is exploitive because you exploit people's desire for victory and their desire to conquer and their desire for wealth beyond what they can imagine. If you're the average fighter that becomes a world champion, you're going to make millions of dollars. The average person doesn't make millions of dollars. Like you have a path that is an incredibly lucrative path if you can get to the tippy top. But how many people get there? How many people become a Kamaru Usman? How many people become a Charles Oliveira? How many people? There's not that many people. It's really hard to become a champion. And those are the ones that make the money. The regular folks, it's just a hard scrabble existence.
Well, I've heard similar arguments for like women who become prostitutes or women who enter porn. It's like these are consenting adults, but it's like it's more complicated than that because
Yeah.
there's other factors,
Yes.
weighing on this person.
Yeah.
And you can't just be like, you chose this. Sorry.
I think competitive athleticism there's a different. See, the thing about porn and in prostitution is like there's probably sexual abuse involved there. There's not always, but there's a large percentage that have been abused by relatives or by it's horrific shit.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of like fighters that were beaten up when they were young. They were bullied or they were abused by someone close to them, and they got good at lashing out and they got good at dishing out punishment on other people because they know how horrible it feels when it's dished out on them.
Or the positive argument, and they might also make this about porn, is that this is an empowering way to recover from that trauma, to take this thing where you were small and little and vulnerable and turn it into a strength of yours that you can channel that energy and that rage into something positive, that you're really good at. Like, clearly, I think, when I think about, like, why did I become a writer? Clearly, there was some desire to be seen or heard that went fundamentally unfulfilled as a kid.
Yeah.
Because why would you develop the skill to sit at your computer and just, if I just get it perfect, they'll understand me and it'll match. There's a...
Well, maybe in a nonfiction context. But in a fiction context, don't you think there's a lot of people that just have ideas, and it's kind of very satisfying to write out those ideas and have other people enjoy them? Like, ooh, this is a good story.
But it could be the same thing. Maybe their circumstances were dire and awful and unpleasant, and it drove them to pursue a world that they could control and make, and explore and have agency over. And you know what I mean? Like, you could imagine the fantasy author being drawn to fantasy for a reason.
Yes. Well, you know the story of Robert E. Howard?
No.
Robert E. Howard's the guy who wrote Conan the Barbarian.
Oh. And
what is that guy? Vincent D'Onofrio played him in a film a few years back that I never watched, which is really odd because I'm a giant Robert E. Howard fan.
Can I have one of those?
Yeah. What do you want,
the
mint?
Yeah.
Yeah, here you go. Neuromints for the win.
Dude, I actually really like those.
I love them. Yeah, I love the gum more than anything. But Robert E. Howard was like a really fucked up, depressed guy who lived with his mom, and his life was kind of a disaster. And he wrote the greatest fantasy novels the world has ever known. I mean, his character to this day is like, I don't know how many millions of copies of the Conan books, but I read them all when I was a kid. And they're fucking good, man. And it's about this character that is the opposite of who Robert E. Howard was. Robert E. Howard wound up taking his own life. I think he was like 30-something years old. He shot himself. But before he did that, he wrote about this unstoppable, unconquerable man who was a giant amongst men, who slayed everyone before him and fought demons and dragons. And he carried you through these incredible adventures that Conan would go through with, like, it was so impassioned. It was so, the words were so vibrant and exciting. Meanwhile, this guy's life was dog shit.
Yeah.
It was terrible. But he wrote about someone who he wishes he would be.
I think also, like, if your life sucks or you're struggling with something or you don't feel good or you don't feel your parents are proud of you or whatever, there's something inherently satisfying and rewarding about just mastering something because you have power over it. It operates the way that you want it. So whether you're mastering writing fantasy or archery or fighting or, any of the, or trading stocks, there's something about, like, I go into this place and in that place, it doesn't feel quite like real life. It feels like you're a superhero, or, you know what I mean? There's something inherently human and wonderful, though, about mastery and mastering something.
Well, I think we have a desire that is probably genetic. It's probably the result of thousands and thousands of years of evolution, where figuring things out is very rewarding. Figuring out how to flint map and make stone tools, figuring out how to play the wind and sneak up on a deer when you need food for your family. Like, all of those things, they're incredibly rewarding for us because that's how you survived.
Yeah.
And figuring out how to conquer your enemies, figuring out how to convince this woman to mate with you, all those different things.
The puzzles of life.
Yes, the puzzles of life. They transfer to chess, right? And the feeling of winning at chess. Like, I'm a big fan of pool. I play a lot of pool. It's a stupid game. Who gives a fuck if that ball goes in the hole? It means nothing.
Yeah.
But it's hard to make that ball go in the hole. And you have to concentrate. And in that concentration of getting that ball to go in and getting position on the next ball and all those things, the reward when you knock that final ball in is like, wow. You get this exciting feeling. And when you miss, you're like, oh. It's the same feeling as like missing an animal. When your family's not going to eat, or not figuring out how to make a tool that's vital for your survival, or not figuring out a way to start fire. If you were a person in the village and you were the guy who knew how to start fire, go to Ryan. He knows how to start a fire, and Ryan can teach you. Like, there's a value in figuring these things out, and I think that is inside of our minds, and we activate those human reward systems, and we activate them whether it's through creating literature, or whether it's through music, or whether it's through getting better at things. There's like this pathway that's ingrained into us that's incredibly human, that we get rewarded for getting better at things.
Yeah, you go back to the first cave paintings, like, what's motivating a person to do that?
Right.
And then you look at, like, where they were and where we are now, and this sort of unbroken passing of torches from like these rudimentary buffalo or horses or whatever to like the Sistine Chapel. You're like, wow, that is a chain of masters.
Yes, yeah, that's a perfect example too. That is a great analogy. Like, the difference between the cave paintings and like St. Peter's Basilica.
Yeah.
Which when I was in Rome a few years back, I couldn't believe how big it was.
Yeah.
Like, when you look at that and you're like, how long did this take? Because you see it in a photograph, and it's pretty beautiful and it's gorgeous. But when you're there in person and you're walking around, you're just like, holy fuck, this is insane. The amount of effort is so undeniable.
Yeah. Or like some of these like cathedrals where it's like they don't even know the person who did it because it wasn't one person. It took 200 years.
Yeah.
And they're just like collectively, that is such a human thing. We're just like, we're coming together to build this burial mound, or we're coming together to build this this cathedral. And it's just a process, and we all just plug into the process. There's something that the Stoics kind of believe that we're all this like giant organism that's working together. And there is just something crazy about that just happens. That's what humans do. Like in the way you look at like ants, they just do stuff.
Yeah.
Or beavers, they just That's what I'm a beaver. This is what I do. That's what humans do. The Homo faber is one of the names for the human species, like man the maker. We make stuff.
We do stuff. Yeah. I've always said that if you were something from another planet and you came to observe us, you'd be like, what's going on here? Oh, there's this one creature that can manipulate its environment in a very sophisticated way, and all it does is make better and better stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what we do. We just do it collectively.
Yeah.
You might think you're just working on your poetry, but you're basically plugging into this human need to improve upon things. You might think that you're just practicing the saxophone, but by you're practicing getting better at it.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing, because everybody gets a reward out of getting better at things. But ultimately, the collective reward is better and better technology.
Well, and then maybe randomly you are a saxophone player who moves the ball forward.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, and it's funny though, the Marcus Aurelius talks about this, you think it's kind of weird, like only recently, like could you get up and look down on human beings, right? Like you can maybe climb a mountain, but like you couldn't get in a hot air balloon, you couldn't get in an airplane.
Right.
We only saw the Earth from space in 1970 something, right? Like, you know, the blue marble photo, the
Yeah.
famous photo, like that was just 50 years ago.
Yeah.
But like, that's what bees do. That's what beavers do. That's what ants do. There are other things that do. We just think we're special because we're us. But like empires are that,
Yeah.
and whole civilizations and whole eras. Like we're just all part of this giant collective thing that's just going on, and we all think we're so important, we're so integral, but we're really just one part of a process that randomly produces progress. For the most part, sometimes produces the opposite of progress, but randomly produces these sort of evolutionary improvements. And then that's how you go from there to here. But it's this timeless, enormous thing that you're just a minuscule part of.
And there's certain instincts that we have that we think are detrimental, like the instincts and inclination towards materialism. Well, why does that exist? Because that ensures that you keep buying the latest and greatest stuff, which ensures that we keep making the latest and greatest stuff, so innovation keeps pushing forward. If everybody was wise and and didn't need anything and was pragmatic and was relaxed and wanted to just live in a log cabin, we would stay static and nothing would improve. But there's these and then when something comes along, like some horrible situation, like where things go badly, like war, like the Nazis, like Hitler, well, what happens? Well, the reaction to that is so intense that it forces people into action, and it forces them to go out and stop that. And then you look at the innovation that happens after World War II, and it changes culture all around the world. Like this horrible event takes place, and through this horrible event, we realize, oh my God, this can happen. And now we got through that, and there's V-Day where they're kissing in the street and everybody's celebrating, and then civilization moves forward in this beautiful way for a while.
Well, there's a beautiful kind of symmetry to it. It's like horrible thing, reaction to the horrible thing. And like, so, if you look at world events up close, right, you're like, Russia invades Ukraine. It's this horrendous, violent, awful thing. It's also, though, you zoom out, you look at it on a 100-year timeline, a 200-year timeline. It's humanity staggering towards some sort of global balance of power. Then it gets out of balance, then it has to rebalance. And so we take these things personally when in fact they just are what they are, and it's always been happening, just like waves have always been crashing on the beach and trees have been growing and falling down. This is what it is, and it's always been that way. It always will be that way until eventually it's not that way. But it just, and that's why I think so fascinating about meditations is like Marcus is the most powerful man in the world, and he's like, who remembers the emperor 6 emperors ago? He's like, he'll go like the name Vespasian, like how odd that feels now. And that was like just a couple before him. And he's like, think about all the people that worked in Vespasian's court. They were so powerful. Where are they now? Yeah. And he's like, the same thing's going to be happening to you. And that this is this thing that just happens. And there's a beauty and a horror to it. But you got to choose the view you're going to take, I think. It's
interesting because the elite minds of the day, for lack of a better term, like Marcus Aurelius, like there's no other form of discourse. There's no other form of entertainment. There's no other form of distraction. You have life, and you have writing. You have literature. You have reading other people's writing, and you have making your own writing. And then you have this comprehension and understanding of the world around you, where you're trying to express it, in his case, to himself. And the valuable lessons that he learned. Like, one of the things that was really fascinating was the value that he placed on forgiveness.
Yeah. Well, so he famously is betrayed by his best friend, who he thinks Marcus is sick and near death. And so this guy named Avidius Cassius goes like, I'm the emperor now. But Marcus wasn't dead. And so it puts him in this horrible position of like, obviously you can't allow this, but he doesn't want to fight a war over. And he basically says, this is the final chapter in The Obstacles of the Way, the idea that like, even this is an opportunity. And he says like, I want to show history how civil strife can be dealt with. And so he tries to give Cassius a chance to come to his senses. Eventually he has to take the Roman army out in battle. They deal with it. And then he weeps when someone kills Cassius because it deprives him of the opportunity of forgiving him, of like giving him clemency.
Wow.
And he orders the Senate. He says, do not execute a single person for this. He says, do not let my name be stained in blood, which is maybe impractical, maybe too philosophical, but there is a beauty to that, you know, he talks about forgiveness in Meditations, but then he has to like actually apply it in his life.
Yeah.
At the highest level.
Well, that happens in history, right? When there's truces and people have to they have to deal with whatever just happened.
Yeah.
Like, that was a real issue with the Civil War in the United States. For a long time, there was a lot of murder that happened where people were punishing people for their participation in one side or the other, and they would go back and forth and kill people. There's a long history. Well, it went on for decades and decades of people murdering people who were responsible for killing their relatives in the Civil War.
Yeah, the horrible part of the Civil War, the genius of Lincoln is he said, both Lincoln and Grant are like, just let them go home, right? Just let them go home. He says, turn their swords into plowshares, quoting the Bible, and they think it's going to work. And it is there's a genius element to it, a sort of almost a Christ-likeness to it. But then the horror is that the South doesn't, like, they're not like immediately like, yeah, slavery is bad. Why did we fight this war over it? They go home and they're like, we still hate black people. We still don't want them here. And now that we can't own them, now they're a problem for us. And some of the worst massacres in American history are basically Confederate sort of paramilitary soldiers. This is what the Klan is originally, is this terrorist organization that just goes around and murders black people, sometimes hundreds at a time. There's other sort of almost battles of the Civil War. And the U.S. really struggles with how do you pacify after a war like that. The argument is we kind of learn this lesson in the Second World War. We go and there's a process of denazification in Germany, which we don't manage to do after the U.S. Civil War because Lincoln is assassinated, which you could argue is why he was assassinated. But we never fully sort of not get rid of, but change the hearts and minds of the people who went to war for like the worst possible cause you can think of for going to war for, next to the Nazis. And so like there's a Confederate statue in the little town that I'm in, and like, why is that there? That's there as a giant middle finger to the federal government.
Yeah, and many of them were actually put up during the Civil Rights era.
Here's a crazy thing. This one went up in 1910. Right?
Wow.
And so that's 50, 60 years after the Civil War. I met a guy. When I lived in East Austin, down the street, this guy, his name was Richard Overton. And when he died, he was the oldest man in the world. He died at 112. Whoa. He was born before the statue went up.
Wow.
So he's black. He lived in the segregated part of what is now East Austin. But we think these things are so old, but they were put up for very specific reasons to send a very specific message.
It's not that long ago. That's what's really terrifying about it. And when I was a child, when I was 11 years old, my family moved from San Francisco to Florida.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I'd heard the expression Yankee. I got called a Yankee. And I mean, this doesn't happen in Florida anymore. This is what's interesting. It's like what happened from the Civil War to 2022 is like it takes generations to escape the hatred of the past.
Yeah.
But when I was a kid, so this was the 1970s, because I was 14 in high school, which was 81. That was my first year of high school. So this is before that. So it was like 79-ish, somewhere around now. And they were calling people Yankees.
Yeah.
Like, it was a thing. Like, you're a fucking Yankee. I was like, what am I?
Yeah.
I'm a what?
Yeah.
Like, what? Are you in a cartoon? I'm a Yankee? Like, this is real? Like, so he had to have heard that from his family.
Yeah.
So he probably heard it from his parents or his grandparents. So they had an attitude about people from the North. Like, they didn't think of us as all being one population. I don't think people experience, maybe in some pockets of the world, in some pockets of the country, rather, they experience that today. But I think for the most part, people think of America as America.
Yeah.
You know, they think of red and blue, like the red states and the blue states, and we're separated in that regard.
But those almost conveniently line up with the same states as how it broke in the Civil War. Like, the Mason-Dixon line is there. When
Is
you
that
look at
for red and blue though? Aren't there a lot of red states that are northern states?
There are, of course, but I'm just saying all the red states were Confederate states, or all the Confederate states are now red states, almost entirely.
I see what you're saying.
You see what I mean?
Yes. So the states that used to be Confederate are now red, but there's also some red states that were not Confederate.
Yes.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's true. It takes generations. We're fucking dumb and slow to learn. It takes a long time for people to figure that out. And I think what we were talking about before, and this is something I discuss ad nauseum, the lack of attention to the worst spots in this country. Like, I've always said that if you want to make the world a better place, make less losers. How do you make less losers? Give people a better starting position. Give people more support. I don't think you should hand things to people necessarily, but I think there's a real value in making communities safer and more conducive to people advancing and getting ahead and showing people more examples of it. Then you have a better, more robust civilization because you have more competition. You have it filled with more people that are doing exciting things and doing things that are fulfilling. And I think you probably have less finger pointing because you'd have a better perspective of what our society actually is. Our society is a society that lifts people up. Our America is a great place because we treat people not just equally, but we look at people who don't have an equal shot and we want to give them a head start and give them a hand up. And I think some people have criticisms of that in terms of like aspects of it. Like some people have criticisms of affirmative action because they think that affirmative action rewards people that are less qualified simply because they came from another place. I think there's a way to do that where we don't feel like that. Where get them young and train them better and educate them better and also protect them. Give them environments, give them community centers, give them places where they feel like they're a part of a great group of other human beings that are also striving. So the environment that they're around is an environment of information, education. They're learning how to think and behave and rewarded for progress, rewarded for improvement, rewarded for succeeding and overcoming bad situations, and also rewarding themselves for discipline. And then also learning that loss and learning that failure and humiliation are valuable teachers. And you don't have to be defined by your worst moments. Those worst moments can actually enable you to produce a better result in the future and show other people that have done that and help them lead the way. This is all possible, man. This all can be done and would have a radical effect on the way this country behaves.
But I think a lot of people want to pretend that this was all a really long time ago. Right? Like
what's going on right now?
Like no, but I mean like Ruby Bridges, from the famous like photo, she integrates that school. She's the little girl that all the parents are yelling horrible things at her, right? She's like 63.
Wow.
You want to think she's like 90 or
190.
Yeah. But no, it's not that long ago.
Not that long ago.
And like think about the effect think about what her parents went through and the effect that had on her. And think about like the age of her children now. Yeah. Like they're like maybe my age.
Right.
Yeah, because she's like, I remember, yeah, she's like a year older than my mother-in-law. And you're just like, wow, okay, so
Yeah.
this could, like, my grandmother went to Little Rock High School, the famous one that was integrated, like 2 years before it was integrated. And so you think about the environment that she grew up in the privilege, the privilege of the fact that like a good chunk of the population was not allowed to go to school with her.
Yeah.
And then what those people, the school they had to go to. And like, it's not any part of like my family's history that we benefited from this. We think it's a long time ago. Like, but it obviously shaped my dad. It shaped the life that we live. Like, there's a legacy of that, and you have to figure out how to address it. But the reason we haven't figured out to address it is I think a good chunk of us just don't want to think that it's true.
I think there's that. It's inconvenient for people to concentrate on things that have happened in the past when they can say, well, hey, I had nothing to do with that. I'm just living my life and I'm doing the best that I can. But I also think that it's like you were talking about before with the negative things that happen, and then through those there's this kind of yin and yang effect, right? I think one of the things that we're going through today is just that. It's just like we're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
So we can't recognize that progress is being done. It's just there's so much work to do. And it's one of the reasons why greedy politicians are so disgusting. When we find out that politicians are making hundreds of millions of dollars off illegal insider stock, well, I guess it is legal, insider stock trades. And that's really what they're concentrating on. They're not really concentrating on their constituents. They don't give a fuck if people get ahead. That's nonsense. It's all lip service. When you hear the White House press secretary talk about, the economy's in a better place than it's ever been before, like, that's horse shit. And it makes everyone angry. And that anger is there to encourage people to act. Yeah. It's encourage people to take steps to do better, to force politicians to be more upfront, to force honesty, and also to get people that are maybe qualified to be better leaders but are reluctant to get involved in that. It may motivate them to get going. I even think, like, I'm very critical of like woke ideology because I think it's essentially a religion. But I think the overwhelming thing about woke ideology that gives me comfort is that all of it is encouraging people to be more inclusive, kinder, more accepting, even if it's wrong. Like even if you're in doing so, enforcing this ideology, you're really victimizing other people, which is possibly the case in some ways. The overwhelming direction that things are going is to make it so that everything's okay. Yeah. Sometimes when they make everything okay, they make people that are not guilty, and they make victims out of people that were innocent. But the direction that it's going is supposedly in kindness. Now, they're being vicious and mean in enforcing their kindness, but this is sort of a natural aspect of human ideology anyway. Like, when people have an ideology that's rigid, they enforce it, and they enforce it the same way they enforce a religion.
No, that's a good way to think about it. At least virtue signaling is pointed towards virtue, as opposed to like open cynicism or nihilism. Right,
or evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you were, growing up in Nazi Germany, and you were openly a Nazi, like that's an ideology. That's an ideology that you signal to all the other Nazis that you are on board, and your cruelty to Jews and your decision to enforce genocide. You're signaling to your tribe that you're doing that's humanity in a terrible direction. This is humanity in a good direction, but it's been hijacked by terrible people.
Yeah.
And generally by people that are failures, that don't have good character or will, and don't have the ability to objectively assess their own thoughts and their own actions and try to figure out why they're motivated to do what they do. Instead, they just do what gets them attention, because this is part of what people do. They try and strive to rise to the top. They try and strive.
The economics of the internet are pulling them in that direction also.
Yes, which is why, Twitter is essentially a mental health compromised market.
Have you seen the "We Are the Baddies" or "Are We the Baddies" sketch?
Yes,
that's like my favorite. Like, wait, the people, we have the skulls, and are we the bad guys?
Who made that?
I don't know. It's some UK thing.
Yeah,
I think it's because we don't say baddies.
Right. It's definitely a UK thing. Yeah, we should find that. We should find that because I haven't seen that in a while.
That Mitchell and Webb.
Can you put it up?
Yeah.
How long is it?
3 minutes.
Yeah, let's play it.
I think this is the whole thing.
Give him some
I'll try
props.
this.
You got it?
Yeah.
Here we go.
Very well. They're coming. Now we'll see how these Russians deal with a crack SS division.
Hans?
Have courage, my friend.
So these guys are wearing Nazi
Yeah.
costumes, folks. They're just listening.
Hans, I've just noticed something.
These communists are all cowards.
Have you looked at our caps recently?
Our caps.
The badges on our caps. Have you looked at them?
What? No. A bit?
They've got skulls on them. Have you noticed that our caps have actually got little pictures of skulls on them?
I don't,
Hans, are we the baddies?
Right, let's see. We should be able to hold them at this point here, at least for a few hours.
And why skulls, then? Why skulls?
Well, maybe they're the skulls of our enemies.
Maybe. But is that how it comes across? I mean, it doesn't say next to the skull, you know, yeah, we killed him, but trust us, this guy was horrid.
Well, no, but
I mean, what do skulls make you think of? Death, cannibals, beheading, pirates.
pirates are fun.
I didn't say we weren't fun, but fun or not, pirates are still the baddies. I just can't think of anything good about a skull.
What about pure Aryan skull shape?
Even that is more usually depicted with the skin still on. Whereas the Allies...
Oh, you haven't been listening to Allied propaganda. Of course they're going to say we're the bad guys.
But they didn't get to design our uniforms. And their symbols are all, you know, quite nice. Stars, stripes, lions, sickles.
What's so good about a sickle?
Well, nothing. And obviously, if there's one thing we've learned in the last 1,000 miles of retreat, is that Russian agriculture is in dire need of mechanization.
Tell me about it.
But you've got to say, it's better than a skull. I mean, I really can't think of anything worse as a symbol than a skull.
A rat's anus?
Yeah, and if we were fighting an army marching under the banner of a rat's anus, I'd probably be a lot less worried, Hans.
He's got a skull ashtray. Drinking out of a skull cup. This guy's knitting a skull.
Okay. So...
That's funny. Very funny.
That's the best.
It's a great sketch. Yeah, but nobody ever has that realization though.
Yeah.
They're in the middle of it and they just keep doing what they're doing. And I think it's also the culture that they're involved. People imitate their atmosphere, right? And I think if going back to politicians, one of the things that got revealed when this whole Nancy Pelosi thing happened, when they started looking at the insane amount of money that she's made from insider trading, they started looking at all of Congress. And it's across the board.
Yeah.
I mean, Republican, Democrat, they are all dipping their toes into those waters.
A bunch of them sold stocks like right before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And they know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they know. They knew a lot of what was going on, like in terms of like the adoption of electric vehicles by the entire United States. The government, they were adopting EVs. And so before that bill gets into play, they dump a shitload of money into Tesla stock. And then look how much money we made. Like they knew these bills are going to be passed. There's a lot of that going on. But that's the culture that these people are involved in. Are we the baddies?
Well, or to go back to the Hollywood thing, it's like, it's not that hard to not be a piece of shit. But
Right.
if everyone's doing it, you're like, why not?
Yeah, there's people that I knew that were agents that thought they had to act like that. They thought they had to be like, get my fucking cup of coffee. Let's go here. They wanted to be Ari Gold. Like
Right.
Ari Gold that's a real human.
Yeah.
I mean, there really are people like that.
Yeah, yeah. There's this great book called What Makes Sammy Run, and it's about this like Jewish agent, like Hollywood agent in like the 20s or 30s, like endlessly ambitious, and we're talking about boxers, like, because he's from the disenfranchised group then, he comes from the slums, becomes the most powerful man in Hollywood, sort of a cautionary tale. But the irony is, as the book, as society evolved, like all the things that, it doesn't age that well, because you read it now and you're like, yeah, that's what you do to get successful. You stab people in the back, right?
Yeah.
Like Ari Gold is the hero of Entourage,
Right.
not a garbage, horrible boss.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, he's also like what people aspire to be.
Yeah.
That's the baller. That's the guy with the expensive watch who drives the Mercedes. He's killing it.
Yeah.
He's out there killing it. You know, you got to crack eggs to make an omelet. Yeah. It's, I mean, that obviously, we have to look to that when we look at horrific moments in history like World War II or like Genghis Khan or like any of these horrific moments where things are so hard to imagine years later. Like when we're looking back on the Inquisition and looking back on the horrific methods of torture that they used on people that were infidels, like who the fuck are these people and how could they have done this?
Yeah.
Like someone sent me this. I'm going to send you this, Jamie, because this is really fascinating. This is from, I forget what year this is. But, yeah, I'll send you this, Jamie. This was he was a judge that took a bribe in court. His name is Sissimness.
Oh, I saw this on Reddit.
Yeah, look at this. It was from Reddit. Yeah, Reddit. Today I learned. He was a judge that took a bribe in court and passed an unfair sentence. He was skinned alive, and his leather was used to make a chair that his son had to sit in as his son was appointed the next judge. There was a later painting made depicting him being skinned alive. And then there's the painting that shows they're just stripping his skin off while he's alive. Look how stoic he looks. He just la-di-da-da-da. They just cut me open.
We don't give ourselves enough credit for the progress that we've made collectively as a society away from cruelty.
Yeah.
Right? Like at the founding, obviously the founders were horrible hypocrites, owning slaves. But the idea that like cruel and unusual punishment should not be a thing.
Yeah.
That was an advancement like not that long ago.
Not that long ago.
And even the ones they said were not cruel were still super cruel. That we've made a lot of, in World War II, they still executed soldiers by firing squad. And just like how horrendous or heinous that you would just make a bunch of your troops just murder another one of your members for doing something wrong. Do you know what I mean? And that the progress away from cruelty is a huge improvement. And so when we watch something like George Floyd or the video of Ahmaud Arbery, and you're just like, that's the worst thing I've ever seen. That does say something about the progress we've made as a society, because not that long ago, people would have seen that many, many times.
Yeah, and even though horrific things still do exist, it doesn't minimize them by recognizing that the trend is towards people being kinder and better to each other. If you you pay attention, like Steven Pinker is a great example. Like his work has been like roundly criticized by woke people because they're saying you're spending too much time concentrating on how much better things are instead of how much better we need to get.
Yeah.
But he's like, I study trends.
Yeah.
I'm studying the progress of the human race, and over time, things have gotten far safer, and people are far kinder, and they're far more educated than ever before.
Well, the problem is if you just look at the trend and you're like, this is just happening, you're missing the point.
Yeah.
Like, there's that quote, like, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. That's because
beautiful.
people are pulling it that way.
Yes.
Like Martin Luther King pulls it that way. Frederick Douglass pulls it that way.
Yes.
Abraham Lincoln pulls it that way. The Harvey Milk, right? Like the activists that were, by the way, widely hated in their own time, criticized, often assassinated, etc. Like they were pulling it that way. It could have just kept going in the horrible direction that it was. Things also can get worse. But you have to accept that you as the individual, or we collectively at a moment in time, have the ability to change the direction of things.
Yes. Yeah, and we collectively have an ability to communicate these ideas that is unprecedented. There's never been a time in history where we could communicate these ideas better, and you're going to get a lot of fog and a lot of noise and a lot of background noise and a lot of people trying to take advantage of this opportunity because of the fact that there's unprecedented models of communication. But overall, the ability to change things for the better has never been. We've never had a situation that is this positive. That we have. Yeah, the economy sucks. Yeah, gas is too high. Yeah, there's potential for a nuclear war with Russia. But just our understanding of the inequalities of life, our understanding of what could be possible, our understanding of the positive aspects of being a good person, they've never been more highlighted.
Well, yeah, and it's kind of weird. Like we so focus on misinformation, like all this bad information is spreading out in the world, and it's true. Like there is misinformation, but it's also equally true that these same tools, the tools are neutral.
Yeah.
Or let's say they have biases, but the tools are the tools.
Well, you know what a great example of that is? The early books. The early books were mostly about witchcraft and how to spot witches. Yeah. I didn't know that until like a few years ago, or not even a few months ago, I should say. Somebody was explaining to me that the early books that were first printed, the vast majority of them it wasn't like, how to learn French. It was like how to spot a witch.
The first self-help book was published in the 1870s.
Really?
Like, just think about how many, so it's like the printing press is the 1400s, right? 1500s. So let's say 500 years-ish, 400 years. And someone was like, what if we use this book to help people get better as a person? And it doesn't have to be because God said so. Like,
I wonder how many charlatans there were out there back then, how many fake help guys. Fake self-help guys.
Napoleon Hill, who wrote that book, Think and Grow Rich, he was a literal con man.
Really?
Yeah, it's crazy.
No kidding.
There's a huge Daily Beast article about it. It's nuts.
Wow.
Once you read it, you're like, whoa.
I have a friend of mine who's a jiu-jitsu black belt who reads that shit before he does anything.
It's a lot of people's favorite book. They sort of, and I'm not saying the book doesn't have value if it made you better as a person, by all means, but there's a dark story there.
So who wrote the article about him being a con man?
I think it's the Daily Beast, or it might have been, it was a different site.
What was his deal?
You pull it up. I don't have it memorized, but it's like when you read it, you're just like whenever someone's like, "That's my favorite book," I'm like, "Read this piece." But maybe people would say that about me. I mean, my first book was about media manipulation, but people change. I don't want to write them out, but
you were a young man. It's the self-help genre is a very troubled genre. Because there's a lot of people engaged in self-help that really haven't done shit.
That's true, and also it's like, do you want to tell people what they need to hear or what they want to hear? They want to hear, you just have to manifest it into reality. Just think about it.
Right.
Think and grow rich, right?
Yes.
Like that's what I think that's his genius is he's like,
yeah,
I'll just tell people, it's just a matter of your thinking.
Yeah, I've had to explain that to many people that want to talk about The Secret. They want to talk about the law of attraction. I'm like, hey, you're only hearing from the people that are successful. Like, there's a lot involved. If you want to talk to a successful person, how'd you make it? Well, I visualized it and I kept working. Okay, yes. But
the second part's the most important.
They kept working. But it's also, the visualization is an aspect of succeed. You can't just succeed and make it to the point where you're running some gigantic business without some sort of a vision.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean the vision created it. There's so many people out there that try to manifest something and it never takes place.
Yeah, well, I know you quoted this once, but Marcus Aurelius' thing about how your life is dyed by the color of your thoughts. It's true. If you think it's impossible for you.
Yes.
Right? If you think you're not capable of it, if you think it's unfair, that is a self-fulfilling prophecy in that sense.
But it doesn't mean that if you think it's possible, it's going to happen. Like, if you visualize yourself beating Mike Tyson, he's still going to fuck you up.
Yeah. But if you visualize that you're capable of making a better life for yourself, and then you fucking work at it every day, chances are, barring some insane, unforeseen, unfair circumstances, you will likely get there.
You will likely get there. And it is a thing that other people have done, and you can model yourself based on what they've accomplished. And if you put in the kind of effort that they've done and the kind of thinking that they've put in, you can accomplish great things. It is possible for almost everyone to achieve something beyond your imagination. You can get there in incremental steps, and each incremental step will open and broaden your possibilities.
Well, and it also, if you allow a long enough timeline, it becomes a near certainty.
Yeah.
Right? So like when The Obstacle Is the Way came out, it did okay. It didn't hit any bestseller lists. The publisher was sort of like, and they'd offered me like half what I'd gotten for my first book. And because they didn't think an obscure school of ancient philosophy, like that's not going to work. But, 6 years later it hit number one. Now it's sold like, almost 1.5 million copies. Like
Wow.
now, but that's because, that's like 100,000 copies a year, a little more, you know what I mean? Like over
Yes.
time, steadily it works.
Well, it works because it's effective.
Yeah.
Like if you read the book, what's interesting to me about the book is it's clearly you have absorbed yourself into the writing of the Stoics, and you relay it in a manner that's very absorbable and applicable. And that's why it's so effective. And when I put it up on Instagram, my God, I got so many messages from friends that say, I fucking love that book. That book's
amazing.
incredible. It's helped me so much. So, through this fascination that you have with this philosophy, I mean, you've generated a lot of really positive thoughts for people, and you've really got people moving in generally a good direction because you give them these quotes in this book, all the different philosophers that you quote and all the different scenarios and where you apply these thoughts, those things, they stay with you. And they're like little sparks that you have in your head that you can blow on those embers and start a fire with.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. The funny thing, so I got offered to write a book about Stoic philosophy because I'd written an article about it that was popular online in like 2008, 2009. And I went to Robert and I was like, this is my dream. Like, this is what I want to do. Should I do it? And he was like, I don't think you're ready yet. And that was like the hardest thing in the world to hear. But he was totally right. I turned it down and I waited like almost 5 more years. And then I think if I wrote it today, I'd be more ready. But like, there's always a point of over preparation.
What did Robert want you to do? What was his?
I think he was like, look, you're getting better every day as a writer. So you're going to only write this book one time. So you should, every day that you wait, you'll be more prepared. You'll be better for it. And he's like, also like, he was like, the difference between like 21 and 27 is a transformative amount of life experience. It's still pretty young to have written that book, but like I went through some shit in that period, right?
Yeah.
And so that the book is more relatable because of my experience. You know what I mean? Like if I would have just been speculating about the ideas if I wrote it when I was 21, I think.
Well, luckily we're talking about Stoicism, and you literally are preaching the philosophy in your books that any sort of negative happenstance or anything that sets you back will probably ultimately be to your benefit.
Yes.
So you had to practice what you preached.
Totally. And then, when it came out and it sold enough copies to hit the list and it wasn't there, you're like, oh, wait, is this something I control or not? Like, am I proud of the book or not? Do I think it's going to work or not? And then you shrug it off and you get back to work.
Wasn't there? What do you mean?
Oh, it happens all the time. Like you can sell enough copies objectively to qualify for like the New York Times list, and then you're just not there. It's an editorial list. It's heavy.
Really?
Yeah, of course. And there's
But wait a minute. So when they say New York Times bestseller, so that's not necessarily the bestsellers?
Definitely
they can eliminate you from the list, like if they don't like what we're talking about?
for sure. And
Wow.
one to eliminate outright fraud. Like, what if a billionaire just bought 100,000 copies of their own book? Like, no one would think that should be included.
I actually know a guy who did that.
There's a company that helps you do it. But like, if you look at the fine print in the New York Times list, and I know this now because I have a bookstore, and so we report to the list, right? You have to send a report each week, and you have to flag like whether there's bulk copies or other things. But like, the list every week would be like, in advice, how-to miscellaneous, the Bible would be the best-selling book every week, right?
Right.
So or Harry Potter would be the top of the fiction. Like they decide to filter stuff out. They even explicitly, I wrote a book about this a couple years ago, but they explicitly filter out what they call perennial sellers, which are books that sell every year a shit ton of copies because like schools buy them or so there's a certain amount of filtering, but the big one for the bestseller list is like, how many of your copies were sold on Amazon, how many of your copies were sold in independent bookstores, was it all in New York and LA and San Francisco, or did you sell a lot of books in Cincinnati, right? Like they're trying to, it's not that they're putting their thumb on the scale, but they are putting their thumb on the scale because there's certain books that don't appear for suspicious reasons, people allege. But like they are trying to create a more robust definition of what bestseller is, not just objectively who sold the most, because that could be unfair.
Well, it's okay because of those reasonable examples that you use, but not because of the ones where they just decide that your subject matter is problematic. So do you think that they decided that Stoicism is problematic?
No, I just think I think it was like maybe borderline, or they just weren't even thinking about it. They weren't tracking it, or, because my first book was about media and the corruption of media, I imagine there was some reticence to recognize me.
Did it ever make it onto the list?
I don't know if it's ever made the New York Times. It's hit number 1 on Wall Street Journal, which is a different set of criteria. The first time I did 10 books before I hit the New York Times list, and it was at number 1. So that's unlikely that I never qualified for any other spot for any of my books until suddenly in 2019.
And which book?
Stillness is the Key.
So that one hit number 1.
That one debuted at number 1.
So they decided, fuck it.
I think it was an the number of copies was overwhelming that it would have been like egregious to not be included.
Interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, how gross.
Well, and the decision of what list you're on. So are you advice, how-to, miscellaneous, or are you nonfiction? General nonfiction, like the general nonfiction list, like maybe the 10 spot is like 5,000 books, but the 10 spot on the advice, how-to, miscellaneous, because you're competing against the Guinness Book of World Records and blah, 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 is, could be 15,000 copies. Like Malcolm Gladwell, because he's sort of part who I love, is a super awesome guy, and I think one of the greatest in the world at what he does. His books are considered nonfiction. But that's, I think, because he's a New Yorker writer.
Right.
And he's part of that establishment.
Yes.
And so that's an incredible gift to him in the sense that he's ranked in a category that is less competitive.
A good example of that is Cameron Haynes.
Yeah,
his book Endure should have been in nonfiction. It would have been number 1, but instead they put it in how-to. And it was highly ranked, but it wasn't number 1.
Yeah, they basically anything that isn't sort of a fancy, like New York-y style thing is going to be relegated to advice, how-to, miscellaneous.
Well, the crazy thing is, for advice, how-to, like that's not what he's doing. He's telling his life story. It's not how-to at all. It is a nonfiction book about his life story.
Yeah. I mean, I did a book called Lives of the Stoics, which is like a set of biographies of all of the main Stoics. There's not any how-to or advice in it. And it was put on that list instead of the nonfiction list.
God, that's so weird.
But you can't care. It's like all the games are rigged. Do you know what I mean? The Nobel Prize is fucking bullshit. Like all of these organizations, these gatekeeping organizations are inherently about keeping some people out and keeping some people in. And so Marcus says in Meditations that ambition is tying your well-being to what other people say or do. And sanity is tying it to your own actions. So you have to get to a place where you're like, I'm good, and any of the recognition or respect or ranking is extra.
Yeah, I think that has to be the case when it comes to selling books, right? Because the most important thing you have achieved is that your books resonate with the people who read them and they enrich people's lives, and that's what you set out to do. You didn't set out to, I don't know how many people are involved in curating the New York Times bestseller list, but you didn't set out to please those people. You don't even know who those fucks are.
But some people, that is all they care about.
Yeah, but, well, that's on them.
No, and it's the wrong thing to do. It's the wrong thing. It's the wrong game to play.
Yeah, for sure. But like seeking recognition is always the wrong thing.
Yeah.
It's just, and especially when it comes to awards, like those are, this podcast has won a gang of awards. And I just leave them places. Like my kid found the iHeart Radio Award, and she's like, "You fucking won this?" She didn't say fucking because she was 10. And I go, yeah, just put that over there. Like that doesn't mean anything to me. It's just what means things to me is, did the podcast provide enjoyment to the people that listen to it? That's all I'm trying to do.
Right.
And if people, an award doesn't mean anything. It's just, that's a small group of people. There can be people that decide it's the worst podcast that's ever existed. Does that mean it is? No, it just means some people don't like it. There's people that don't like things I like. I can't take into consideration what other people like. I can take into consideration, did I do my best and put something out there that resonated with a certain amount of people? That's all I'm trying to do.
There's a story about Jimmy Carter, who was not the best president, obviously, but he was being interviewed by Admiral Rickover, who was the head of America's nuclear navy. And Jimmy Carter, like, people don't see him this way because like, maybe we think about him as this old man, but he was like, he went to the Naval Academy. He was ambitious, successful. Like he was driven to be like great from a very early age. And so he's being interviewed. He just graduated from the Naval Academy. It's like 48, 49. And he wants to get on a nuclear sub. But the way to do it is this guy, Admiral Rickover, decides, who's one of the unsung heroes of American history that very few people know about. Immigrant, went through Ellis Island, Jewish guy, his family flees persecution, helps us win the Second World War and then the Cold War. But anyways, he's interviewing Jimmy Carter. It's like a 3-hour interview like this. They were kind of these like big, long discussions. And, you know, Jimmy Carter's like going on and on about all his accomplishments, you know, like, here's what I did. I got this grade. And then Rickover goes like, how'd you finish in your class at the Naval Academy? And he was like, I was 56 out of 800. And Carter thought he'd be like, oh, wow, that's great. Like he was beaming with pride about it. And Rickover just looks at him and goes, did you always do your best? And then Jimmy Carter was going to be like, of course, you know, that's what you say. And then he thought about it. And he's like, you know, I kind of coasted through this class. Like I didn't always study this. Like, you know, and he was like, I'm going to be honest. He's like, no, I didn't always do my best. And then Rickover looked at him and he said, why not? And then he got up and left the room.
Oof.
And like what you control is whether you did your best. You don't control how you rank in the class. You don't control whether you won this award or this scholarship or bestsellers. You don't control any of that. You don't even really control if people like what you do.
Right.
You only control if you did your best and if you were proud of it.
That's a great metric. Yeah.
Did you leave anything
on the table?
On the table.
Yeah.
Hold anything back.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing that haunts athletes, right? When they examine their legacy. Because that's the one thing, unless you're involved in organized practice like certain sports, where you're and even then, there's off-season.
Yeah.
What are you doing during the off-season?
Yeah.
You know, certain athletes are notorious for working incredibly hard during the off-season and coming back better than ever, whereas other guys get fat and, you know, people think it's funny that they're laying around waiting to come back.
Isn't that life though? Like
Yes.
you like for sports, like you have, let's say, 10 years in your professional prime, but like we think we're so different, like because we have a longer amount of time.
Yeah.
But you don't. Like,
don't.
And it's only in the light of the cancer scare or, you know, the COVID diagnosis, only the thing that shakes you out of that entitlement do you go like, oh no, it could end at any moment. Yeah. And to take it for granted or to waste it or leave something on the table is the rejection of a credible gift and an opportunity.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a great way to end this.
All right. I brought you some books, by the way.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. These are all yours?
No. These are books.
Different books.
I know, because I know you love Empire of the Summer Moon.
Yes.
So I tried to pick some books that I think, I went through my store this morning and I was like, these are books I haven't heard you talk about that I think you will fucking love.
Okay.
All right. Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World. I know you don't like him very much, but I think it's a
Not
different
that I don't
view.
like him.
No, I think you will see him in a different way.
Okay.
The Tiger. This book will rip your fucking face off.
What's this about?
This book is about a guy in Siberia sent to hunt down a man-eating tiger.
Ooh.
And it's literally, I know it's one of the best nonfiction books ever written because I've heard from so many people about it. And then, have you read Shadow Divers?
No.
It's about these guys diving.
Today's like Christmas.
This is my life, man. They're diving a sunk German U-boat off the coast of New Jersey that they discover.
Oh, wow.
And it's like all about the thrill of like diving and discovering something and the mastery of this thing that could kill you at any moment. Have you read The Black Count?
No.
Okay, this is the Count of Monte Cristo,
Yes.
the famous story. Okay, Alexander Dumas, his father was one of Napoleon's generals, but he's black.
Oh, wow.
And his real life story is fucking incredible. This won the Pulitzer Prize. Speaking of prizes, it definitely deserved to. It's amazing.
Wow.
All right. River of Doubt. You read this?
No, I can't believe how many books you brought.
I figure you're going to get them all on audio, but I'll give them to you. Okay, so after Theodore Roosevelt is president, he goes to Africa, he kills a bunch of animals, the greatest hunting trip of all time. But this book is about, he explores like a 500-mile river in the Amazon, the first time a human being has ever done this. And he almost dies. He takes his son with him. He almost dies. Actually, if you look up Theodore Roosevelt, Epictetus, he brings a copy of Epictetus with him on this journey. And did you ever go to his birthplace in New York City?
No.
Next time you go, you can go to the house that he grew up in. You can see.
They maintain it?
Yeah, it's still there.
How big is it?
It's just like a townhouse in New York City.
Oh, wow.
And you can see the gym where he worked out his asthma and became like the dude that he became. But if you look up, you can see, he took a copy of Epictetus with him that he wrote as he was near death.
He's one of the main reasons why we have public land in this country.
Yeah.
We have our wildlife preservation system that we have in place.
He also saves professional football. He gets them to wear helmets. People would die playing football at Harvard, and he loved sports. And he comes together, forms the NCAA, and institutes safety.
Wow.
This is a book about, so if you click on, see where it's signed, this is like the engraved copy that he takes with him.
Oh, wow.
But that book's amazing.
What happened there, Jamie?
Zoom.
Zoom's just automatic. Wicked River, the Mississippi when it last ran wild.
The Mississippi is fucking crazy. I have more. I have even
have
more.
more?
Can I keep
Jesus
going?
Okay.
All right. I know your daughters are into sports, so this is a book I give to every college coach that I talk to. It's about this. She's one of the great cross-country runners of her generation. She commits suicide. She runs off a parking garage. And so it's about mental health and pressure and I think it's any person who has a kid who is good at sports and wants to make something of it. And Kate Fagan's an incredible writer. Should read that book. It's like a cautionary sort of warning and about what social media does to kids. Actually, I did this book with Chris Bosch. He lives here. You might like that. And then, all right, last, I have two more. This is The Best History of Texas. It's fucking epic. The Best History of Texas. You have if you
Fuck is this brick?
I would listen to it. You can listen to that one. But seriously, it is also incredible.
Okay.
And then, all right, last one. This is my favorite translation of Meditations. I don't know if this is the one you read, but I would read this. And then I know you like Stephen Pressfield. This is the first edition
Jesus
of The War of
Christ,
Art
dude.
that he signed.
Wow. All right.
I read that book every time I start a project.
It's a great book.
Dude, it's one of the great. The Resistance.
It's so perfectly outlined. Like
That's what it is. That's what you're at war with in everything.
Thank you very much, Ryan.
Of course, man.
Great to meet you. Really appreciate your work. Appreciate everything, and I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Bye, everybody.